Good evening. I call this March 27th work session meeting of the Morrisville Town Council to order. We have one subject tonight, and that is our budget discussion. I'd like to pass it right now to Town Manager Brandon Zudema.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, everyone. So this is workshop number one of what we anticipate to be three. So tonight is a bit more of a general overview. We're going to have in just a second Laura come up and share a little bit about what's going on with the budget outreach and that communication plan, because you've expressed interest in that. And then from there, we will move into capital planning, a little bit of an operational outlook. I'll give you some general perspective about where I think we are this year, and also looking forward. We've got some unique situations and things to work with. And then we'll really do a wrap up to make sure that we have heard from you any questions or thoughts you have before we really start moving into developing a draft recommended budget. For your information, we met with all of our department heads this week. So we spent, 30 of the 32 hours this week so far in meetings about budget. So that's been exciting. But we've had the opportunity to, really dig in a bit with what the requests are. So we got all our questions answered. So then we will use that now to begin crafting the budget. We started that a little bit this afternoon. And then we'll come back to you at the first April meeting. We'll have a little more detail behind that. And then hopefully by the second April work session, we'll be either done with discussion or close to done with discussion to let me ensure that I bring you a recommended budget that you can be happy with. So with that, Laura, would you like to join us up here? And I can manage, and we can take questions as we go, because there's really different sections, so probably better we do that. If you have questions for Laura, please ask those, and then really within capital planning, let's ask those questions, and then we'll move to the operational side. So let's ask those questions while we're on that topic as well.
And we have some sections where you'll see questions for us to kind of break it up a little bit, so you'll have some opportunities.
All yours.
Yeah, I'll
take over with the outreach.
All right. So before Laura kind of talks about where we are with the majority of our budget outreach right now, I did want to take an opportunity to share with you all the results of our preliminary survey. We had about 86 participants in our preliminary budget portal survey. To give you all a sense of what questions we asked, we did streamline it a little bit this year in order to try and gather some more participation and make sure that people had the ability to participate without it being burdensome and without them kind of stopping halfway through and then not completing it. So we asked two questions. We asked them to rank the 6 strategic plan goals, and we asked for a written response for whether or not they wanted to share any other thoughts or ideas with staff or council related to budget brainstorming and information related to the budget. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you all right now. As I stated, we had 86 participants, and the top areas that we saw within the written response really focused on 3 key areas: cost of living, transportation and traffic, and sustainability. So within cost of living, they really focused on a lack of affordable housing, minimizing future tax increases, as well as updated or ideas related to affordable housing. Within transportation and traffic, we saw a lot of responses related to improving our current transit services, as well as pedestrian safety and walkability, alleviating some traffic congestion and clogged intersections. And then within sustainability, we saw a focus on preserving natural resources and green spaces, consideration of sustainability when meeting the rest of our goals, as well as overdevelopment concerns within the community. So kind of ranking our strategic goals from that question, we saw the number one priority for the participants tended to be thriving, livable neighborhoods. Second was public safety readiness, all the way down, as you can see on the screen, transportation, engaged inclusive community, operational excellence, and economic prosperity. So as you can see from the matrix there, it is spread out amongst each of the different categories, but these going through our ranking of priorities, the top was livable neighborhoods, the bottom was economic prosperity. And so with that, I will turn it over to Laura to kind of talk through some other aspects of our budget outreach plan.
Thank you. All right, so right now we are in phase 2, which I believe you've seen is Nothing But Net, which is our play on March Madness. And I just want to shout out the comms team. We're so excited about this campaign. We were super excited to get it prepared for the public because we love college basketball. So I'm just going to go over what we have going on right now. Right now, our theme, Nothing But Net. We launched a bracket yesterday afternoon on social media, so you can go through and pick your budget priorities bracket style. We got that bracket listing from Holy, where we did an interactive activity. We took the votes from the public, and that's how we built the bracket. The bracket's also going to be launched on next week in Morrisville. It's on the website. We have flyers. We have it out in the lobby, so if you have a second, check that out. We have digital displays at all the centers. And we are also using Rept, which I believe you know about the video. We're really encouraging the community to reach out to us via Rept so they can get to know the staff, what we do. So the next item, we are doing social media engagement. So what I'm going to be doing is updating the public on the bracket results as we go to keep them excited, keep them hyped, get them doing the bracket, get them talking about budget. We're also reaching out to advisory committees. The budget team will be attending advisory committee meetings to reach out to those people. We're going to be reaching out to our small businesses, HOAs, and community partners with emails, visits, bringing them flyers, bringing them brackets, things like that. Also, the budget team is graciously partnering with us on some events. Like I said, we were at Holy on Saturday. We had a lot of people stop by to talk to us about budget. We're going to have some flyers and activities at Peeps in the Park. We're going to have some handout at Screen Day. And we're going to have some budget open houses once turning the page, which will be in May, where we're going to invite the community to come talk to us in person, get to know what they want, get to know their priorities. But like I said, we're super excited about that.
Yeah, and I do just want to add how much budget staff has been appreciative of comms with this entire process. One of the big things we really wanted to focus on this year was engagement, trying to increase the participation. Not only did we see those 86 participants in the survey, but through our rep portal so far, we've seen roughly, is it about 4,000 different engagement points?
4,500.
Yeah, so we've had a pretty significant amount of engagement through Rept, which is really, really positive, and we're glad that we were able to bring that on board as something that not just generates some interest from the community, but also, provides us with more information as we go through this process that can help tailor this message and gather information for you all to be able to make decisions and prioritize things as we go through the year. I also do want to point out our two budget analysts in the back of the room, Don Rabb and Micah McCrae. Micah's our new budget analyst. He's only been here about a month, and we're really getting him to cut his teeth on this process pretty early. So we definitely appreciate them here, and I did want to take the time to recognize them as well. When it comes to outreach and engagement, does council have any questions before we kind of move on to the capital? Oh, you had your thing up first. I'm sorry.
So for the first, when I took the survey, I don't remember if we had explanations with each of the pillars. Did we have some sentences with each one, or did we just have the pillars and rank them?
For the bracket or for the survey?
For the first survey.
The first survey that we did in January was full descriptions of the priorities.
Okay, that was the 86?
Correct.
Yes.
Okay, so as long as we keep on doing that. And
Yes.
when you were talking about Rept, I thought it might be good to do one video on each of the pillars, explaining what a pillar is. So,
I like
because
that.
otherwise it's kind of sentences. People don't really understand what economic prosperity means. I mean, how does that relate to them in their
Right.
lives? So a way to make that more personal to them, I think would be really great.
I agree with you on that.
And thank you very much for getting us started. Really good. I was 2 out of 3 up front,
Oh, I love that.
so I got to get a little bit better about that.
Councilmember Scott Johnson.
First of all, we love engagement. This
do
is
too.
great. And when I heard and read that there was 86 responses, I was like, wow. I mean, we've had like 12, in previous years, and that has just grown so far. And we're very early in the process,
Right.
and you're still engaging, and you're kind of giving a visual to building and engaging and having a voice. So I applaud the communications team and the staff and all the
Thank you.
closet strategists, right? There's people I know that are not in this room that are really the big thinkers. The one thing that I have found helpful in previous years is to kind of see some of the raw data and some of the raw comments.
Mm-hmm.
The aggregation is really appreciated because I like to see where it's going, but I also sometimes want to read individual comments to help me better understand the context of where people are coming from. So if that could be made available
Sure.
throughout this process, I think there's also an opportunity for the budget portal once the budget is released, and there'll be additional comments that are more specific to those areas. But well done, and thank you.
Thanks. We're excited about it.
So in front of you, we did provide the FAQs where they currently stand post-retreat and post-retreat wrap-up. That is something that I will make sure to add to the next FAQ when we come back to you all for the next work session.
Great, thank you.
So I'll have the rest of those comments unabridged for you.
I think I saw Councilmember Johnson and then Councilmember Rivas.
So that was my my same question, to see the input. I'd like to see the 86 now. And then the next, you're talking about all the different engagements, maybe at each kind of point, if we could share the additional engagement. I don't care how you all want to provide that, but that would be really helpful
Okay.
as we're going through. I don't want to wait to the end to get it all.
Nope.
So.
Got it.
Thank you. Councilmember Body?
So I actually do care how you provide that information. I would rather not get a printed spreadsheet. I hope that you'll be able to provide that electronically.
Oh, yes, I will echo that. Sorry.
Yeah. The other thing is, I really wonder if 2 questions on the budget survey, if we haven't maybe overcorrected in the sense of trying to ask fewer questions, because I mean, I appreciate the 2 questions are rank the pillars and then tell us anything else that you want to tell us. So I feel like we might have like maybe overgeneralized that a little bit. So, I mean, I think that it would be good as we go forward, like 86 responses by now. I remember a year we had 7 is amazing, and good work there, because it is hard to get people to log in and take a survey. But I would like to gather as much targeted verbatim feedback as possible. So just something to think about as we go forward, maybe once we've narrowed it down, like you narrowed it down to 3 things, maybe a question about each of those things would be a good idea, or something to get more specific feedback.
Okay.
So I'll also just add, from my perspective, I really wanted to try and gather a lot of participation related to the priorities themselves. Really try and get a sense of where the community stood with just that basic information first. And we will be performing a second survey with a lot more tailored information once those priorities are fully set. And we have initiatives kind of attached to them and funded through them. So we will be bringing that back as well for you all. And that will be I'm not going to say a much longer, but it will be a longer and more detailed survey so that you can gather some additional information associated with that. All right. Any other questions? Okay. All right. So we will continue on to the capital planning and the CIP section. So do want to point out the session goals for this. We do want to kind of give you all a sense of where we are post-retreat with the changes in priorities and the current CIP, where the recommended updates will be within the 5-year plan. Make sure I'm right on the right slide there now. Yeah. Give you all a sense of where the funding is aligned within the 5-year plan currently, and the updates that have been made associated with that. We also want to review some land acquisition resources that we currently have and talk through that a little bit. Talk a little bit about some master plans, some assessments associated, as well as unfunded projects, and then give you all an opportunity to kind of have some discussion related to the CIP. So with that being said, we'll dive on in and talk about the changes post-retreat. So as you can see, we have a couple of things highlighted in red. Those are new projects that have been added. And the remaining projects are just kind of where we see some shifting related to the CIP. So we have 5 major areas of focus within the CIP: the parks, transportation, facilities, public safety, and sidewalks for the post-retreat changes. So the items that we've added are the senior center upfit, as well as potential another recreation center that would roll within the 5-year window where it previously would have been outside. As well as adding some sidewalk improvements on aviation, or sidewalk inclusion on aviation. Also want to point out that we've had some other shifts associated with NC 54 and McCrimmon betterments, mainly due to the fact that the NCDOT timeline has shifted those out some, so they're still on the plan. However, they have moved back to be in line with where DOT funding is kind of situated right now. In addition to that, also want to point out that we do have the Wake Tech and the Markham Park projects moved back a year. The fact that we shifted Public Works to from a full construction to a purchase and acquisition and an upfit of a existing facility, as well as the Station 2 relocation that has moved as well.
Question.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, I'm still on. Still green. Okay, sorry. What exactly is the recreation center 5-year window? Because it's my understanding the senior center could be a 5-year or a 10-year. It's not fully determined, but and we have MAFC, so this looks like a new project. Is it different than town center?
Well, yes and no. So we've talked off and on about a community center that would essentially replace the space we have at CFCC, would replace the leased space for the senior center, would bring those all together in a single building, would allow us to have like an indoor walking track, perhaps some indoor basketball courts, and then the seniors would have a dedicated space in there, and then we could also have like a community room in there. So that's the idea, is to build that in the town center area as, again, another draw to bring people to the downtown area. So we've had some conversation about that. That is just now starting to show up on potentially in the 5-year window. You know, some of that, of course, is going to depend on how these other projects get done and what the costs are. And then, you know, we still have to build a fire station, so that'll potentially impact timeline. But we're coming up on where that would be a consideration. So right now we're considering a 5-year lease for the expansion of the senior center, in all likelihood at McCrimmon Corners, staying where we are and adding the 2 adjacent spaces. So that would be a 5-year window, and we would then ideally in that same sort of time frame be looking to potentially start construction or at least design work on a community center if you all gave us the direction to do so.
Okay, so I was not really aware that the recreation center was moved up on the CIP. I know that it's always been close to my heart as wanting to have something like that, but I didn't realize that we had moved it up. The other thing is, under facilities, I would highlight in red the Public Works shifted to acquisition upfit project. That is no small feat. And you need to like shout that to the rooftops, because we made a very strategic decision to move the Public Works facility to a new location so that it would provide more stability, and it would also save the public a lot of money. So that should not be the same color, because that's a significant strategic shift. Thank you.
Mayor.
Just about the parks, the move Wake Tech back 1 year, would be helpful in future presentations, like from FY something to.
I'm Sorry, I can hardly hear.
My mistake, that was not on. In regards to parks, when we say back 1 year or forward 2 years, it's good to identify which years it was, what year it will be, just for more clarity. That would be helpful for me. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it's great to have the community center and the town center. I've always thought that, and I think that it's just important for us to, and I know these efforts are being made, just to convey that to our seniors, that we're thinking about them, that we want to have a larger center, because I think at the end of the day, that's a better option than updating places. Although it looks like the decisions were made, so just want to say that. I mean, I realistically don't see it moving up from 5 years, but just as long as they know that, it's part of the plan.
I would suggest we share that with them on a monthly basis,
Okay, thank you.
because we get that question.
Well, I
on
know,
a
I'm getting
monthly
them, I'm
basis.
getting it all the time, and people, I'm thinking, but we are, and I think it's gonna be a big thing, and it's just a nice place for them, just like what they have at Baum Park and Cary, but ours is gonna be better.
Thank you. All right.
All right, so when taking a look at what helps to influence us when we go through our CIP planning process, obviously we know that capacity and affordability are major pieces in that, but we do have other considerations in addition to that when we're looking at this. So the first one is partnerships. There are plenty of times when we utilize our local partners and partner with them in order to be able to get projects done. So examples of this would be DOT or Campo, as well as Wake Tech and Wake County Public Schools when we're looking at either land leases or funding for road construction projects. Another example of something that plays as an influence in this process are right-of-way acquisitions, things that affect some of our other larger projects, also DOT projects. Grant resources, other funding availabilities. We're constantly as a staff and as an organization looking to maximize our ability to acquire grants in order to help offset some of the funding hardships that we might have with certain projects and help ease both of our reserves and the rest of our funding sources when it comes to our CIP planning. And lastly, I do want to make note that there is the future potential for a bond referendum in fiscal year 2030. We have multiple projects, one of which being a recreation center, as well as a potential multi-use center in the town center area that could potentially be funded with a bond referendum. So as staff continues to monitor the CIP, as well as kind of where we sit with our debt service and our fiscal position within the community, that is something that we will be considering to be able to bring back to you all at a later date.
Councilmember Bond?
So I would be really happy if any mention of a future bond referendum came coupled with a list of all the projects that are complete or shovel-ready from this bond referendum.
Okay.
Because it's been difficult for me to really track what did we do with the bond money. And I know that projects take a long time, but we specifically said that we were going to go shovel-ready projects with this bond. And I don't want to talk about another bond until we're really doing a great job of messaging what we've done with this one. And I feel like possibly right now, and I'm not casting aspersions on anyone, but I don't think the public has a really good sense of what we did with the other bond. So I think we have a lot of work to do there before we start talking about a bond referendum.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's definitely something that we can add to the next FAQ and bring it back. I do want to point out, which I'll go into a little bit in this next slide. Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry about that.
No worries. I wanted to also thank Councilmember Robati for bringing up the bond. One of the things that we need to do, in addition to show what we've been doing from the current bond and maybe previous bonds to show the goodwill that we've been building the town with the permission of the public and the support of the public, is once a bond has been fully met and we fully, like the 20-year bonds, and it's no longer needed, we don't necessarily stop and ask for more bond money with that same revenue stream. So in some governments, when a bond has been fulfilled, you have it, you don't collect that revenue, you ask for a new bond. So, and then there is a net of zero. Now, I don't know if that's the situation. 2030 is far away, but I think in good faith, we need to not just think a bond always means a tax increase of X, Y, Z, but we need to be good stewards and message about what this bond is. Like, we need a 3-cent bond, but only 1 cent is an increase. 2 of those cents are, similar to replacing the other bond that you're carrying. So it's important that people understand we're not just always raising taxes. Now, I know Liz has had some experience of a zero raise with a bond referendum and how that kind of put us a little behind in some of the growth. But I still think it's a good discussion for the council to consider if a bond has been, fulfilled, what is the next step? Thank you.
So, Councilmember Johnson, I will get to you in just a second if you don't
That's
mind.
fine.
I just
Yep.
do want to just say I think this is a good opportunity to just shout out Jeannie for all of her work on our long-range strategic plan, our long-range financial planning. That is something that we do consider when we're looking at balancing a CIP as well as the rest of our operations. That we are cognizant of the fact that a lot of times when we have issued GO bonds, it has come coupled with some sort of tax rate implications. And so when we do plan to go out for another bond, that is something that both our current staff as well as our financial advisors are not just aware of, but that we plan for, so that we look to try and minimize the tax impact of the funding sources that we're going to come up with. So I do just want to point out that that is definitely something that will be considered when we plan to do any sort of GO referendum in the future. Mm-hmm. Yes, ma'am. Councilmember Johnson.
So, yeah, I agree with all that. So, and I agree with what Ann said about we need to be able to message where we are with the last bond before we ask for any new issuance. But I just want to pause for a minute, and it kind of goes back to the discussion we had a few minutes ago about the recreation and multi-use center, this new facility that we want to pull into the 5 years. I'm very much in favor of all that. But then it's also listed here under a future bond referendum for potential funding. Maybe we can do it sooner. Maybe we have to wait for a future bond. But then that ties all the way back to the senior center and the fact that we're looking to extend that lease for 5 years. I really want to hear about other options besides 5 years. I want to hear some options for extending that beyond 5 years for the senior center lease. As much as I would hope that we have a new facility in the town center that would incorporate the senior center, it's not going to happen in 5 years. It's not going to, I don't see the doors opening in 5 years. So I want to make sure, and I know this has been said before, but I want to say it again and emphasize it again. I want to see some options beyond 5 years for the extension of that lease.
Yeah, it should not be an issue. I think that they are minimally open to that, if not suggested a longer term when these conversations started. So I think that certainly is a possibility. So we'll be giving a bit of an update to the seniors at their next meeting in April and about the potential for that lease agreement and extension, but also the adding of the space. And then we'll be back to you after that with options on what that lease agreement might be in terms of years.
Okay.
But thank you.
All right. So,
Councilmember Robb.
No, just in terms of the bond, I agree with both my colleagues have expressed that I think it has to be very specific about what are the things that we achieved in the last bond. But I think it's also important for us, whether it's to our communications department or our staff, to be able to educate the people of Morrisville of the projects that have been successful because of the bond. Our staff's gotten a lot better about doing bonds from the first one we did when I was on the council in 2012. That took a lot longer, but sometimes when I go around Morrisville, I think about what would we be without the MASC it is today? Where would we be without the McCrimmon extension? All that development along there near the competition center. All these things happen because of the bond. So I think there needs to be a place somewhere on our revamped website that reminds the residents of Morrisville, because there's a lot of new people that have moved here. And with everything going on, with the carry bond failing, I know we also need to know, even if we begin to discuss it, what would that bond look like in terms of dollar value? What would it be? The reality is I don't think you can do these bonds without some kind of a tax increase. But, maybe you can, or you can phase it in. But I think it's important for people to know that moving forward, right? Because there are successful things in Morrisville that happen because of bonds.
I think to that point, and Councilmember Scroggins Johnson, to yours, absolutely there's discussion to be had there, beyond just the bond. That's going to be part of our somewhat larger, I think, discussion about overall sustainability of our budget. Where do we see the growth continuing to come from? Now that Wake County has made their announcement on the reval process, that plays a part in this as well, in terms of, when we can time a bond, I think. So we'll be talking with you about that as well, after we get through the budget process, but as we continue to look forward. Thank you.
Okay, so just wanted to add this slide in for reference. These are a list of a few of our current active CIP projects. As I stated, this really is just for reference. We don't really want to kind of dive too far into these, but I do want to point out that these are projects that will be provided updates for in our monthly capital projects updates for you all. So these are projects everywhere from town center to sidewalk gap projects. Okay, and taking a look at our current CIP 5-year outlook, based on where things are sitting right now, do want to point out again that this is considering all of those influences, both affordability, capacity, as well as our other funding opportunities that we see that we have the ability to get to. There's about 18 projects on here. I do want to point out that this does not include any of our land acquisition projects. They are not on this particular page, just because we have a different funding source, and I wanted to call that out specifically in another slide for you all. So as you can see, 26 to 30, kind of where the projects are lining up right now, as well as the funding sources associated with them. The ones in red are the ones that have changed, and that is based on the democracy assignment that you all did during retreat. Thank you. Yes, during the retreat. It's been a long time already.
What's a long time ago?
Yeah, so this is from that exercise during the retreat that you all gave us this feedback on. So we have been responsive to that and tried to shift the CIP accordingly based on both funding as well as your input.
Where are the potential, excuse me, sorry, where are the potential upfits to the cricket pitch related to the design work that's currently going on?
So we're actually going to bring you an update with the engineering department and the consultant we used April 22nd, I believe. Yes. So the April 22nd meeting, they'll be here to share with you their findings and what that outlook may be, what the recommendations might be, the potential costs associated with that. And then once you hear that, we can also have some conversation, I think, about what we anticipate in regards to the possibility of funding through the county from the housing and meals tax, and how much money may or may not be available there to support such a project.
Okay, and how come we have Fire Station 2 relocation design? My understanding when we did the last fire station was that we'd be able to reuse that design.
That's the intention. There's still some tweaking has to be done. It's a different lot. We've got to make sure that, of how it sits, and they still got to do all the site planning and all that. And then, there's still a piece as we talk with Wake County EMS as to whether or not they want to be a part of that building. Because if they do not, we potentially could reduce some of that size as well and bring that price down a little bit. But keeping in mind, they paid for their portion last time, so that's not really a cost savings to us. It's just less money coming in and less construction. But yeah, there still is some, particularly site work, that needs to be done to make sure that that building's going to fit and function there.
But that's not a full-blown design effort where they're designing the building. That's site
No,
design?
the intention is to start with the design we have from Harris Mill Road and see how that fits onto that site. And then we've also had, we're going on 2 years now in that new fire station, so we also have the opportunity to look at how does it function? And is there anything we should tweak about that doesn't function exactly how we thought it might or should? So yeah, it's not by any means full design, but there is some work to be done.
Okay, thank you.
All right, taking a look at the stormwater CIP, this does have a dedicated funding source from the stormwater fee. So I don't want to dive too far into the actual projects, but I do want to point out that these projects are funded with that stormwater fee, and it's something that we built in a way that is sustainable for these 5 years. As you can see on the page, we do have a beginning balance, which is the fund balance in the capital portion of the stormwater fund, and that is also being used to offset these costs as they go out. So the plan is self-sustaining. As I mentioned earlier, did want to point out these dedicated land acquisition funds that we do have. It's about $4 million from the Parkland bond. That's funding that could be, bless you, that's funding that could be used for potential parks projects and land acquisition. And then also we do have additional land acquisition reserves that exist in the land acquisition fund. You all dedicated a penny last year to growing those reserves. There was about $300,000, a little bit more in there prior to that. But that right now that is kind of planned for a future town center land acquisition. And I just wanted to point out that it could be used for other land acquisition as well. But right now that's kind of where we have it earmarked. So that's a little bit over $5 million that we have kind of planned for future land acquisition in multiple areas. And then I also would like to talk a little bit about master plans, other assessments that we have both proposed as well as completed. We do, have a pretty large need for a Parks and Rec master plan that we're looking at, as well as another RFP that's out currently for town center signage and wayfinding. Those are kind of two large ones, but there is also other proposed plans, one for streetscape and landscape kind of continuity, as well as an assessment of fire station 2, which, you mentioned a second ago. But then we also have a few other completed plans that have recently been finalized. The C2P was finalized this past year, as well as affordable housing, the Pew House, and the Stirrup Iron Creek feasibility study that was completed in 2023.
So I think part of the reason we want to show you this also is as we begin to build the budget, we are going to have, revenues that we can invest again, that you'll have the opportunity to do things in the community and with the community. But at the same time, you don't have perhaps as much as certainly not you had last year because of what happened with over revenue neutral and even some past years. So when you look at these, the Parks and Rec master plan is a $200,000 to $250,000 item. The district branding, signage, and wayfinding, a similar number. Townwide streetscape and landscaping, a similar number. So when you start looking at what we potentially have available, that can eat into that. So one of the things that we're trying to do to be innovative and to give you some options is we're looking at some of our reserves. And so, you set aside a lot of money for very good and different purposes. And so these studies are often done to further that work and to prepare for, an update to parks or for a specific project. So one of the things we're going to give you the opportunity to consider is potentially using some reserves to fund some of these plans to allow us to maintain a little more operational flexibility in the budget. And again, we'll talk through that with you. If you have thoughts tonight, we're happy to hear those, but we'll be coming back to you with that. But wanted to sort of plant that seed with you to think about that, because we're going to try to do that in some innovation and some flexibility in that operational sense in a couple different ways. So just wanted to sort of share that with you as Byron has sort of talked through, you can see how many studies we've done and how many still have to come. Mayor?
And it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, that Parks and Rec Master Plan, we're more likely to get grants if that's kept updated. And
It can
there's
help in
better
some
data.
cases, yes, sir.
So that's a way to really leverage other people's dollars too, which is
Correct.
helpful.
Councilmember Fender?
So I'm just curious, what would be an example of using reserves to
So-
fund some of these?
So the Parks and Rec Master Plan would be one that we would consider using the money out of the Parks Reserve.
So the parkland,
No, there's a standalone Parks Reserve that is
Okay.
intended to support parks projects. And in our thinking and the way we're trying to look at this is that makes sense that this would further any number of projects in the future by allowing us to get the master plan done. We have a number of things on the horizon, whether you talk about one or two new park opportunities, we have disc golf opportunities, we have other opportunities at Church Street Park. So bringing a group in that this is what they do is analyze, where are you at, where are you trying to get, what are your existing resources, what are other options that may exist. That helps us then be a little more prepared for a method of why we're approaching certain projects the way we are.
okay. I was just wanted to make sure you weren't using reserves from one of the land acquisition. Okay.
No, we have a specific parks reserve. Same thing if you look at the streetscape and landscaping plan, that could potentially be a transportation reserve. So we're going to look at those and bring you back some options with that.
All right.
Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, my 2 cents, I'm not interested in any of the money getting used for the reserves because that's an operational item. And the reason we have done this reserve is purely to go into projects. So it just doesn't, it is counterintuitive by using that money there. That's,
Councilmember Bud?
Here's a sentence you don't hear too often. I 100% agree with Satish. I don't think we're putting enough money in those funds now and just start taking out $250,000 at a time. I really have a problem with that because I feel like it could also be a slippery slope where, because I understand that it looks like there's a big pot of money sitting there, but $4 million in the park fund is nothing. Like we could use that up in a hot second. And so I would have to hear a lot more about specifically what we would be trying to do and if there would be a plan to put that money back in at some point if there was increased revenue realized from the parks or something like that. I would have a tough time with that one.
Thank you. Councilmember Fender, do you have something else? Okay, thank you.
So, moving on to unfunded projects, as you can see, there is a list of unfunded projects on your screen right now. Want to point out that, these are projects that have been a part of our approved CIP. However, because there is not funding dedicated to them, you don't see it on the other sheet, but I do still want to call out the fact that these projects do still exist, that they are still on our CIP, they're still unfunded. The mayor, you made a good point a second ago that, having a Parks and Rec master plan, keeping that updated still allows us to potentially have some grant opportunities in the future. Having these unfunded projects still on our plan also do the same thing. So if funding opens up grant funding in the future for any of these projects, we do have the ability to apply for them and look for those particular grants in order to be able to fund these types of projects. Yes, ma'am.
What is CSP redevelopment?
That's what we're talking down here
Church Street
too.
Park.
Okay, can y'all just put that?
Absolutely. Absolutely, we can do that.
Yeah,
So that we're not speaking in code?
I agree, even for the public, I agree. Ann and I just had that conversation down here, and I was racking my brain too, and yeah.
I did get it before.
Yeah, she got it, Ann got it before me.
Took a second.
Yes, we can certainly take away the acronyms for a lot of these and make sure that it's spelled out for the public. Yes, All right, so what are the next steps for our CIP? So, the main thing that we're looking to do is try and refine these cost projections to be able to provide you all with the most accurate projection of costs, not just for any individual project, but for the plan as a whole. We also want to outline those future operational impacts because we know that, all of these capital projects have operational impacts to the rest of the general fund and the rest of our operations in general. So we definitely want to consider that. And then last, we just want to finish shaping out what that final recommendation looks like for our debt model and what we have in both reserves and for the plan itself. So with that being said, we do have a couple of questions and give you all an opportunity to kind of speak. The first question is, by the way, are you raising for the questions? Or are you raising because you have another question? Okay. All right. You're ready. All right. So I'll read the question. I'll let you guys jump right in. So we have two questions. The first one, are there priorities that council wishes to revisit that's currently existing within this current draft? And also, what information would be helpful to you all in finalizing the CIP for the budget for this fiscal year? So we'll start with Councilmember Johnson.
So I'll kind of just restate what we had discussed earlier related to the new recreational facility. I'd like to better understand where that would fall, when design would be targeted, and then construction, because it definitely seems to me like it's larger than a 5-year plan. Like you might be able to get design in a 5-year, and then there's some downstream effects for that, such as the senior center and impact on their current location. I just would want a little more detail about that. The other thing is I need some confirmation from staff about Wake County's March 17th policy change on the reevaluation of Wake County properties. So just to give background on what I think I heard is that we typically have a 4-year reevaluation cycle across Wake County that affects not just Wake County properties, but every town in the county. And the town council then takes that evaluation, and we're supposed to identify what a revenue neutral rate would be in order to provide the same amount of revenue to the town as it does that day with the new amounts. The last evaluation, we saw a higher and faster rate of increase with residential properties than commercial properties. So even at the revenue neutral rate, the residents of Morrisville had a tax increase. And that was both for the town as well as the county taxes. So if we are doing this in a more frequent fashion from 4 years to 2 years, which is what the policy change is, that imbalance could continue. We don't know. Nobody has a crystal ball, but I'm concerned about impact on residents. The town could be setting the revenue neutral rate, never increasing the rate, but people could still experience a tax increase because their houses were increasing in value faster than the commercial properties. So it's about the entire property. It's not just looking at residences and trying to see what their changes. I think it's important we educate because that will go into the bond consideration. That will be a new activity. It'll take on a lot more burden for council as well as staff if we're realigning every 2 years. I see it as a big concern and an opportunity for education. So it's not going to affect fiscal year 26, but it could affect fiscal year 27 and 28.
28, yes.
So, and so we need to start messaging that as part of understanding how your properties are taxed and considered. So I just thought I'd say that because it is a change, although it's not going to affect this cycle. people are going to ask about it.
Yeah, and I will just point out, you are correct. Some additional information that they also provided was that they were going to phase it in. So the first, or our next revaluation cycle will be 3 years, and then every subsequent revaluation will be every 2 years from that point. So I can certainly add that to the FAQs and add a little bit more detail so that we can provide that information to the rest of the council.
That'd be
So we can
great.
do that.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm curious to know where this recreation center is all of a sudden popped up from. You know, I know I'm getting old, but I don't recall this being on any of our lists during the retreat. So why is it all of a sudden showing up here? And yeah, where's this coming from?
So it was a request that we have received.
From who?
Staff. So it is something that we have on the plan currently.
But it's not something council talked about during retreat.
Can I jump in here just to clarify for some historical purposes? Actually, the Recreation Center has been on the CIP for many years, and it has been tied very closely to Town Center Phase 2 and targeting a particular corner in that area. We have, it was a item that was in your democracy exercise in terms of ranking. So I think it's just maybe the recognition of the name is that I think it may have had recreational center -- multi-use facility when you were doing your exercise. But this really goes back for a number of years in the CIP, and it's just always fallen. To address why it is now appearing on the 5-year picture is because it's always been out there in the future years with the alignment of Town Center. And now as Town Center Phase 1 is moving forward, this project and others are rolling off the 5-year window, and we're pulling those older projects, the projects in the out years that were unfunded, forward into the window. And I hope that answers your question.
It does. It just doesn't. I'm not happy about it because I feel like there's other projects that have been out there for a while as well, such as the Crabtree Nature Park and the Pew House that are unfunded. I mean, and for a while, at one point, not all that long ago, the Crabtree Nature Park was imminent, and we made the decision that between the town center and the public works facility that we would have to kick it back and not be able to fund it. So, which, you know, I know a few of us weren't real happy about, but saw the necessity of it. So I'm just a little bit surprised to see all of a sudden this recreation center show up. And it just doesn't feel like we had discussed it at all. So that's my thoughts with concerning that. I mean, because that's why, I mean, even if, yes, we're starting Town Center Phase 1, there's currently no plan for the Recreation Center to be in that Phase 1 design. So it's still a years out. I don't know, for me, there's other projects out there that are a higher priority. Like the Crabtree Nature Park, or to do something with the Pew House, which would actually probably be less capital investment. So that's my thinking there. With to me, that is a lower priority than some of the items up here. And yes, I would like to revisit that. Some of the other items, I was going to say, I guess that's it. Just that, are there other priorities that I want to revisit? Yeah, but I don't think they'll go anywhere. Is the Crabtree Creek Nature Park and the Pew House. I still want to see those be a higher priority. I'm still pushing for those.
Understand it. And again, that's part of why we're here tonight. We want
Yep.
that feedback. We want to understand as we continue to work through this process. Do want to share with you that this was shown on the Dotmocracy results and was discussed at the February 11th work session. So it has been discussed, but I understand your concern. And again, that's why we've asked the question we've asked is if you don't agree with or feel something different should be prioritized, that's what we'd like to hear to try to meet, consensus with the group.
All right, yeah. I feel like other things should be prioritized. I don't think the Wake Tech Park should be a priority either. I think that land should be just left as is, left as a natural area. But that's what I'm thinking.
And that is generally the intention for the Wake Tech Park is we don't envision, I think, building any structures there unless
Okay.
you were to give us some different guidance. That we do anticipate that being maintained as much of a natural park as we can. There are a couple opportunities we could potentially do there that wouldn't be heavily impactful. Disc golf is certainly an opportunity that could be placed there as a permanent course. There are some other lighter impact opportunities. Parks and Rec has had some discussion about perhaps a low or a high ropes course, things like that aren't going to be a structure. I mean, we're not going to build, necessarily shelters and that sort of thing. Again, when we get into design, we would hear your feedback, but we see this as I think we agree with you, is it is intended to be more of an open space, natural park with some
Or like
limited
green
use.
space.
Yeah.
Like keep the trees.
Yeah, that's the intention. We have no intention to do any clear cutting or anything like that. Maybe some very minimal to cut some paths through for walking or jogging or whatever, and then again possibly a course or other options there.
I like that. That's all. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. I'm not sure who came first. We'll start with Councilmember Rabati.
Agree 100% about the Wake Tech Park. I think it would be like, I wouldn't even like to see a ropes course out there. I'd like to put some hammocks out there and be done with it, like they have in Dorothea Diggs Park. I think that's just such a great use of the land that's already there. And then, people just go out there, they enjoy nature, then they come home. Very much in favor of that. So I didn't actually see Town Center Phase 2 in the capital project plan. Did I miss that, or is it there?
It is not there.
Okay.
So we don't have that plan yet. So what we're still focused on acquiring the property. And so I think one of the conversations that will come up with you as we perhaps open Town Center Phase 1 is, we still have 1B that we need to deal with, which would be the other side of Foxglove behind the library, which we had talked about potentially being a marble site that is not looking promising right now. They just announced their sort of massive expansion at their site. So we would need to talk about what that might be. And then from there, we would need to work with you to identify what Phase 2 might potentially be. Some of that may depend on the property and the land we've acquired. And then again, it's also, we have some decisions to make about, are you going to try to pursue another public-private partnership? And if not, are you just going to use your zoning to necessarily control what goes there? So we have a lot of options, but we have a lot of discussion to have before I think we'd be remotely ready to try to put a price tag on it. I think if I told you a number today, I would really be making it up.
Well, because the only reason that I'm saying that is because if we're saying that sometime in the next 5 years, we're going to attempt to, that was just design of the rec center on the current plan, wasn't it? Or was it the full out?
No, that would just be the
Okay,
point
design.
at which we would start some design
Okay,
conversations.
so if we're saying that in the next 5 years, we need to have that center designed, then I think that we should also keep in mind that Town Center Phase 2 is going to be all around that rec center. And so, I mean, I'm wondering how many of these other projects are actually going to be able to get done. Town Center 1 is costing $19 million. So that's something, I feel like that's kind of like a white elephant in the room, but it's invisible, because
I
we
get
don't have
that.
anything about it on any of the projections. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy with the priorities the way they are. I'm happy with that we would be designing a rec center. I think we need a rec center very badly. So I'm happy with the priorities the way they are, but I think that to not have the Town Center Phase 2 anywhere on the 5-year plan, I don't think it sets us up for success.
So I think agree, understand. I think one of the challenges is, I think not just we staff, but also we Sing and we some of our other partners recognize that the success of Phase 1 is really going to help to drive who may come for Phase 2. So we really do feel strongly that we need to get that open. That'll come up in 27, so that we can see that it does what we think it will do, which is begin to draw people, and it'll be activated. The cottage retail will be successful. Once we can begin to demonstrate that gives us a little more juice behind moving forward and beginning to talk more seriously about what Phase 2 may be. And again, then there's also the ongoing, efforts at property acquisition. I think we're bringing you, John, another one in April. So we're continuing to work on that. We've got those opportunities. Again, thank you for the authority you gave us to sort of work within some parameters. That's let us work a little more efficiently. So we will bring you one more property, and then we can also that evening give you an update on where we stand as far as what's left, because we are making good headway in acquiring properties there. Thank you. Mayor Pro Tem.
I want to go back on Vicky's question about the taxes. I think we need to get Marcus and David Ellis to town hall and give their pitch, because this has been done, and I don't want to be the person giving that news to our residents. And I think it is important for them to come and tell and take the questions and answers from the community, because it is not in our space, because I don't want to get into that, neither I want our town staff to get into that space, because it's who they're doing it, and the assessment will go up and down. And my biggest concern, I'll be very honest, is we are 55% commercial. And that is a scary thing for us. I'm more scared about the brick and mortar O&I around Perimeter Park. If that takes a hit by 10%, that's 10% hit on our tax base. And I don't know how you guys want to think and plan about it, because every 2 years, if it's like going this or that, it is a lot of tax, the last thing we want to do is let any people go or cut programs. So I want you guys to be very conservative in your approach, especially the kind of stuff that is going on. Because if it was some other mix of not O&I, which is going up, which is okay, but O&Is are not doing that good.
I agree. Thank you. And we can certainly invite both of them. I assume that they would be willing to come out and have that conversation. I think we would likely do that perhaps summer or fall once we're through this budget process. I think that makes some sense. And we are already talking about, I've had that conversation with some of you individually. Staff is certainly talking about, we're wary of that as well. Because, we, as you know, have always been conservative in the way that we estimate revenues and the way that we work through the budget. So that certainly is going to change, but you're right, there may be a call to be a little more conservative, particularly with looking at that 2-year window of, we've talked about I think there's some pros to doing a 2-year window, but there's clearly some cons or some concerns, if nothing else, with doing that. So we'll continue to talk with you about that. Thank you. Councilmember Johnson.
Okay, so I'm going to echo that concern as well. And we have had this conversation. And you're right, there are pros and cons to doing reevaluation more frequently. I'm really concerned about all the cons, quite frankly. That's, if the pros all work out to our favor and our communities and our residents' favor, all so be it. But there are some downsides that I'm worried about. So I would echo all that, and I would like them to come here and have to answer. And I know they voted on it, and it sounds like it's a done deal, I guess. But that's okay. They can come and explain to our community what that means and why. So I would agree with that. I also want to say, I agree with Donna. I think before we move, I'm supportive of the recreation and multi-purpose center, and kind of getting ready to design that, but in the next 5+ years. But I would agree. I think we need to, before we bless this, we need to take a look again at what those CIP projects are, what our alternatives are, and make sure that we're really happy with choosing this over all the others that we might choose. So I would say we need one more go around on this, and if you share the CIP with us, all of them, so that we can see what our options are, I think that would be fair.
Sure, we can absolutely do that. Thank you. All right. Councilmember Rao.
Yeah, I agree on getting them to present, because I think I want to see, I understand from their argument the pros, but definitely concerned about that on the reval as it relates to tax rate, revenue needs of the town, and expectations out there that, we're being kind of like less money coming from the state, less revenue coming in, increasing demand, people coming in and out of the town. One thing that, and also looking at some of the other priorities, although I do support the recreation center, just want to make sure we're looking at other needs. One question that, go back, you had CSP up there, Church Street Park, right? Maybe we're going to be bringing this back before the council. And I know the mayor pro tem has been plugged into this a little bit, but I'd be very curious as to, like, where are we with our plans for investment in the cricket, Church Street Park, cricket pitches, hotel occupancy potential for the cricket. I've been hearing from many others out there in the leagues, there's concerns of the investments that we need in that park not happening fast enough, and that the window that we have is closing to bring in some of these things. Now, is this something that we're going to be apprised of in terms of our CIP? Because to me, I think that's an important priority, for at least from my perspective, is that that's our one thing in Morrisville we have, and I just want to make sure we're doing everything we can, for that.
So again, engineering will be here April 22nd
Okay.
with the consultant to give you an update.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mayor?
There be dollar estimates with that presentation on the 22nd? Because I think that would be helpful to have some kind of placeholder about what our share might be, best case, worst case.
Giselle, I believe there are some cost estimates associated with that, yes.
Because we could kind of a la carte pick and choose of those as well, because there's some big rocks.
Yeah, I
they'll
think
bring
you want to hear
forward.
that presentation and,
Yep.
and what they have to say.
Okay. In regards to having another kind of look at this, the retreat was really helpful. And so it gave us a first look, but now that we're digging in, I think it would be helpful for all of us to. I really liked it a few years ago when we had just a really long list of, and you had to choose which is higher, these two. And you compare all 18 against each other. And then someone works their magic and figures out what our actual priorities are, instead of just ranking them by a list, but actually having to choose this one over this one, this one over this one. Eisenhower
Yeah.
exercise. So
Yeah.
I found that very helpful and really got to the core of whether or not the Pew House is above the rec center or vice versa and things like that. So I think
We can
that would
certainly
help us.
bring an exercise back to you.
That'd be good. And the Wake County land, I like the idea that we might be doing some small things that don't really impact it. Does that mean that those would be looked at in 27, fiscal year 27, or are those
The
like
Wake-
small, lower,
Wake County, you mean Wake Tech?
the Wake Tech?
Okay.
That's what I meant. like if you're thinking about just putting on some hammocks or clearing some walking trails, is that something that happens now so it's not left alone for 2 years? Or is that the design that you're talking about starting in FY27?
Yeah, the design would be in FY27.
So nothing would
Is
happen
the plan
until
right now.
then?
I mean, again, if you want to have that conversation, we can potentially do that. That may impact depending on, it may not, I mean, depending on how much we do that. But I think we can follow up with you, either in a meeting or offline about, what the potential interest is there. Again, if it's hammocks, not a big cost.
Right.
But, we also want to decide if that's something you want to master plan that space. And I'm not talking about a $250,000 study, but I
Right.
think someone that can come in and look at that and hear your ideas and do a little basic master planning of, what do you want to do with that facility? And that would give us a better idea of what costs might be.
Okay. Because I would really love to consider just having staff internally look at that space and say, okay, we know what our residents are looking for. They would love a space with some hammocks that you can walk into a couple hundred yards, be really quiet, away from this stuff. I think a little disc golf course, even call it temporary, it doesn't have to be permanent at the start, so that we don't have a big gap between when we have our groundbreaking in August and not have any disc golf in Morrisville for like 18 months or something.
We have
Because
another
people are used to
option
it.
for you that we'll be bringing back.
So,
So let me
just
ask,
some
in
thoughts.
regards to the Eisenhower exercise, I mean, if you're open to it, that can be done offline. I mean,
Right,
we could expedite that process as part of this CIP review. I mean, we could get that to you probably in the next couple of weeks and give you, a weekend or as much time as you need to potentially do that. And then we can compile that and have that ready for a discussion rather than necessarily needing to use work session time.
yeah,
Okay.
I think offline would be great for
All
that.
right, great.
We did it that way before, right?
Yep.
You have done things, you've been effective in doing things like that before, yes.
And I really like some of the amenities from the Crabtree Creek Nature Park. And we talked when we sort of postponed that for reasons of looking into whether or not we could have some of those educational opportunities or things that were in that park kind of along the existing greenways. So is that still being looked at all?
I don't know, we're looking at that right now. I mean,
Okay.
again, if we get that direction from council, we could certainly do that. But we're not actively doing that now. We haven't had that direction to do that.
Okay, so would that maybe be a roundtable thing to bring back? Because like some kind of,
Yes, I mean,
well, it
that's,
always depends on the cost, but the brief roundtable is just do you want them to look at it? So, okay, so
Yes.
I can bring that back. And thank you very much for mentioning hammocks, because I do like the Dix Park hammocks. So that would be nice to get those around town before we finish our town center green. Okay, that's what I got for now. Thank you.
anyone else on anything related to CIP capital project? Okay. So we're ready to transition. Do you want to just push through? Do you need a minute? Take a quick 10-minute, because we don't do 5 minutes, let's be honest with ourselves. But we can do 10 minutes, I think. So 7:27, please, thank you.
Okay, back to Town Manager Zudema.
Thank you, Mayor. So the second part of this conversation is going to be more focused on the operational side. What we'd like to do with you is provide an early glimpse and some influence into budget development, demonstrate how staff may align to what you've identified as your brainstorming ideas and priorities, refresh on key influences, obligations, and staff resource needs, touch on budget balancing strategies that may become necessary. That may be this year, that could be in the future, but again, we're trying to not just think about 26, but at least looking at that 3-year window. And then, of course, we'll pause for discussion prompts and happy to take questions as we go. So we're going to go down to some slides you've seen before, but this is partially for you, partially for our community members to see what we're talking about. So on this slide, this is your takeaways from the SOAR exercise that you did at retreat. Again, it talks about strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. Not going to insult you and read all those to you, but you can see that there's not a lot that should surprise you or the community, some consistent messaging there around what you'll find in our strategic plan goals and in what your identified priorities are. So we use that as one of our guiding documents as we start to look at budget priorities and how we best serve the community. Also, you did a prioritization exercise, and so you identified ultimately 10 priorities as we move into this budget season. Those include business collaboration, community viewpoint, could also be community perspective, same concept, economic resiliency, inclusivity, and then operational excellence, always important. You are consistent to talk about taking care of your staff and making sure that you are doing the right thing by them, which they, I can tell you, are very appreciative of. The next 5 would be quality of life, recognizing successes. I think we've heard that loud and clear from you, that there's a lot of good going on. You know, there's a lot of challenges, but there's a lot of good being accomplished, and we're going to make sure that we're doing a good job of sharing that, not only with you, but also with the community. A safe community, again, not a surprise, always at the top of the priorities, both amongst council and our community members. Sustainability and environment, and then finally, transportation. So beyond that, we also look, of course, at our strategic plan goal and how they align to what you have identified as your 10 priorities. And again, want to say that these, as we've, I think, said before, these could fit under multiple different goals, but we've aligned them to show them each in one place. So the no-brainer, transportation under transportation mobility, sustainability and environment, as well as quality of life related to thriving, livable neighborhoods, community viewpoint and inclusivity under engaged, inclusive community. Public readiness, of course, is safe community. Operational excellence, you've identified actually operational excellence as one of your priorities, along with recognizing successes. And then under economic prosperity, economic resiliency, and business collaboration. And of course, you've already heard a lot about that through retreat and some other presentations from Tiffany McNeil. And then you will also, pleased to share with you that our small business specialist starts Monday. So that is Amelia Hosine. Thank you. I've gotten the first name down. I'm struggling with the last name still. So Amelia will start on Monday. She will obviously work closely with Tiffany as well as the Chamber of Commerce as we work to collaborate on those types of things. So we're excited to have her join the team. And that is where you are in your priorities. So coming out of the retreat, some emphasis and some action. So you saw this sort of outline before. But one of the things we heard was, putting ideas in motion. So making sure that we continue to brainstorm with you, with the community, with our staff, so that we're planning for outcomes. We're not talking about outputs. We're not talking about we need a person. We're talking about we want or need to accomplish this to meet your priorities and to meet the priorities that the community is helping identify to us through the budget portal and through other exercises that'll be ongoing, including the Nothing But Net shooting for budget input. Planned budget outreach and engagement, just spoke to that. And then again, really continuation of the current budget philosophy. I think what we've generally heard from you is that you don't want to turn upside down. You want to continue to focus on taking care of the staff that are here, recognizing they're a critical asset to what we do. You've talked about still wanting to continue to make investments in the future through reserve funds. And then you've talked about again, understanding the community perspective, making sure that what you're prioritizing and what staff is bringing to you in a recommended budget can be clearly relatable to and understood by the community, our taxpayers that are providing these funds to us. So you will see a lot of that as we come to you in the next couple of work sessions. Again, core operation assessments, we've already mentioned the pennies. That is a good way to develop those reserves. As we talked about at the retreat, this is not the year that there's going to be a solid waste fee change, so we will hold on to that for any future discussion should there be that interest. We're really going to focus again on closing out previous grant funding and preparing for that next bond issuance. So that I think goes to what some of you have mentioned today. We are certainly now going to focus on making sure that we are clearly communicating, what did we do with that 2012 bond? What have we done with the 2022 and 24 bonds that we've issued? And there's a lot of good there. That's an easy accomplishment because based on your direction and your priorities, we've done a lot of good, I believe, for the community with those monies. And then some core study areas. We are continuing to work on Parks and Rec fees, cost recovery, cost analysis. You'll hear more about that at the April 10th work session. And then also the Public Works renovation, again, to, I think, the comment earlier that, that's something to celebrate. So clearly there's a lot of innovation there. There's a lot of great work by our staff to identify that opportunity. And we are slam forward right now, making sure that we're assessing the property, the building, the total circumstances to make sure that before we close on that it is what we think it is. And so, we have some consultants helping us work with that. Jeffrey was able to take his entire team there within the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I think they were all very excited about this opportunity. Again, if you consider the circumstances under which they're working now and the opportunity we have with this facility, it can be really, really good for them and really help the Public Works Department provide that level of service that this community expects and is accustomed to. Budget submittal, again, we are doing a full assessment of user fees and where those opportunities may be, not just in parks, but in other departments, looking to maximize revenue based on being, within the market on what we're doing there. There's some realignment of base budget this year. But again, we've talked about that really next fall, we're going to do a deep dive into all aspects of base budget to make sure that as we go forward, we're not making any assumptions. And I think, Mayor Pro Tem Garamelli, you spoke to that last time. We've done that with positions. We've done that in some cases, but it has been, at that point, it'll probably be 3 years since we did our last deep dive into, let's make sure that what we're providing you is what you need and that you're still using it, and are they in a priority sense? So we're doing some of that in the basics for this budget for FY26, and then in the fall we're going to do a deep dive into all of that, because we're going to have the staff to help support that as well. We're still certainly focusing on completing FY24 and FY25 objectives. Our goal is to certainly be in that 90th percentile of expenditure of the annual budget. You will recall probably 4 years ago, we struggled with that a little bit. We had backed ourselves into the 80s. And not that we weren't spending the money, but we weren't necessarily encumbering it. We had some issues with some road maintenance that just didn't get scheduled because of some challenges. So we have really focused with our staff the last 2 or 3 years about the criticality of making use of the resources they're provided. Because we are asking you for more resources. You are in turn asking the community for more resources. So we've got to ensure that we're intelligently using those resources. So we are, one of the focuses of our mid-year sessions with each of our departments is for them to share with us, what have you done with the money you were given this year? And if it was in 24 and carried over, is that project getting completed? Are you starting to see outcomes? Is that what you expected it to be? And then again, I mentioned we did budget meetings this week. We went back to it again. If we didn't have the whole answer when we did that in January, we went back again. What about that? We gave you this money. Is it going to be done? And if not, why not? Because there's been a very clear mandate that we need to be efficient with the resources that we are provided. Again, rethinking recruitment and retention. So David Hacker, our HR director, has brought, I think, a different perspective to how some of that works. I think his perspective very strongly aligns with yours, which is focus on getting the right staff and keeping the right staff. And so he has some plans that we're going to try to support with making sure that we are more consistent across the town in terms of how we recruit. We are working again on our leadership academy that should help us with retention. We are trying to be creative in the way that we support our current staff. So you'll see that again in the recommended budget when that comes this year. Equipment replacement. We continue to do a lot of work. We're doing a lot to implement sustainable EV equipment wherever we can. We continue to expand our access to EV chargers. But the more work we do, it does not get any cheaper. The equipment doesn't get any cheaper. Adding new things doesn't get any cheaper. But we're also, in some cases, spending that money to actually save money. One example, Jeffrey and his team are doing a lot of concrete work now internally, and they're saving us a ton of money and time because it's cheaper to do that internally than to hire somebody to come in and do it, and we don't have to wait for them to have a spot on their schedule. We make that schedule. Well, I don't. He does. But they're very innovative in that regard, and that's because we have a street supervisor who's just, I think, really been good. He's been a good find. We may or may not have borrowed him from a nearby municipality. But he's been fantastic in looking at how can we be more efficient, how can we better utilize, again, those resources that we have. And then ultimately, when we get to May 13th, it's going to be about what has been prioritized. Because I will tell you that we have, this will not surprise you, more asks than we have the opportunity to invest in. So I know that shocks you. That happens occasionally. But I would tell you also that the asks that we have are all very realistic. Nobody is bumping anything up. Nobody's fluffing anything up. They're all listening to, what our values are, what our strategic plan is, and they're trying to do what we're asking them to do. Unfortunately, a lot of that costs money to do. So we'll be focusing on prioritization. That, again, it goes back to why we've showed you and the community, what is the strategic plan? What are your priorities? What came out of that SOAR assessment? All these exercises to make sure that we're on the same page with you, and then really seeking this input from the public through the budget portal, through the Nothing But Net exercise, and also we'll be holding open houses and other opportunities for community feedback to make sure that we're understanding everyone's priorities as we budget. So this next slide is about obligations. So this, again, is a bit of a reminder to you and also just to educate the community that may be interested. We have some major recurring operational expenses, and they continue to grow. If they get more expensive through inflation. We do more as the town grows. There are life cycles that we need to deal with on equipment and other things. So the 4 areas I just want to highlight for you, one is personnel. We are committed, and I know you are committed to making sure that we're remaining competitive. We're offering good benefits. We're training. We're doing all the things that make us an employer that people want to come work for and want to continue to work for, even if they develop a skill set that they could take somewhere else. What comes of that is it's expensive to maintain staff. So we have 239 full-time employees. We probably use between 50 and 75 additional part-time staff in order to do, if we follow what we have done in the past, which is what I anticipate I will recommend, which is a COLA, a merit, and then we do pay in class every year, and we also do longevity now. It's going to be $2 million off the top of the new revenues to compensate and maintain the staff that we have. So that's again, one of those things that we're going to continue to talk with you about because we want to make sure that we're sustainable in that regard over time. But that number for this year is right around $2 million. Contractual services and repairs, we caught a break with solid waste. I think we were all probably anticipating that being an increase, but we were very fortunate the GFL came back and actually reduced their numbers slightly. But you look at the other things we contract for, landscaping, janitorial, utilities, the consultants we use, all of that is just getting more expensive. So we're prepared to accommodate that. So again, there's probably $175,000 increase, and that's really through the primary main 3 that we use. So that's just things that we do because we can't necessarily do that ourselves, or it's not as feasible to do it ourselves. So we do still rely on some contractual services. Again, planned debt. Jeannie and Byron are very, very good about making sure that we are planning and that we are maximizing our ability to use debt. But again, we continue to see that grow as we take on more debt. Now, again, we are rolling some debt off, which is good, which helps our model over time. But again, that's all accounted for. So we're looking at a slight increase this year. And then, of course, we also anticipate an issuance or perhaps two that'll be related to the Public Works facility. Mayor?
I just want to make sure that we're all aware, and there might be opportunities to push back against the elimination of municipal debt being tax-free. So that's happening at a couple of different levels.
Yes.
And that might be something we want to make sure that we're part of a larger organization like NCLM or NLC to make sure that we're making sure that people are still able to invest in us.
Yes, and staff, I sent that to staff to take a look at. The last one on this slide is inflationary increases to base budget. Again, just the basic work we do gets more expensive. Things that we don't necessarily control. So we anticipate about a $200,000 increase to base budget operations as we move into the new year. That's not doing anything new. That's just continuing what we're doing and seeing it increase in cost. I'm going to turn this over to Byron, to talk about real briefly.
Yeah, so these next few slides are slides that the council has seen before. We have updated them, but I did want to provide you all with this particular information in a format that was familiar to you. So I know you all are familiar with our resource capacity playbook. I want to point out that our base budget resources this year sit at $57.9 million, and our base budget expenditures sit at $51.4, making our capacity about $6.5 million. Now, those expenditures do not include the funding for the capital reserves. That is not included in the base budget. So that is a budget request that will come through. That's something that council will need to fund in that particular process. Moving on to the budget outlook, as the manager stated, we do have $14.5 million in budget requests. That is roughly about $6 million in one-time requests, about $8.5 million in recurring requests. So within that recurring request section, that is where those personnel requests that the manager mentioned, they do sit in that recurring section. But I just want to point out there is more requests than that $6.5 million worth of base budget capacity that we have. So obviously we're still monitoring revenues, still looking at fine-tuning our projections over the course of this budget process. We'll look to pick up any additional revenue that we can. However, it is very, very, very difficult to fund $14.5 million with such a large delta between there. So the prioritization is going to be very, very important this year in order to be able to, create a budget and present a budget to you all that will be not just sustainable, but will be able to fund a lot of initiatives and things that will continue to help move this community forward. Also, just taking a look at those one-time versus recurring costs when comparing it to your priorities this year. This is the $14.5 million broken out based on those one-time and those recurring requests. As you can see, three of the larger areas that we have funded are operational excellence, our recognizing success, and our safe community section. So a lot of the recurring requests that you see that are larger there, those are your commitments to reserves as well as those staff personnel increases that we see this year through the merit market, pay in class, as well as the longevity. So taking a look at staff resources, did want to point out that performance plan does include a 4.5% performance merit as well as a COLA just to keep up with the pay with any sort of pay compression that might arise from this current year. We do have what we consider to be competitive market adjustments through the pay in class study in order to make sure that we are being competitive with our recruitment and retention in order to maintain the highest level of an employee base for this community. Do want to just point out that those benefit increases, as well as last year's merit market increases, are built into the base budget. But other requests that are coming online are the new merit market paying class increases, as well as any additional personnel requests, both new positions and reclasses from staff. Those are coming in as requests, not part of the base budget. Do want to point out that our resources do take into account workload management, trying to balance the fact that we do have space needs in the midst of trying to look at these positions and truly evaluate them, considering all potential operations as well as any potential outlook. And then just want to point out that in the midst of working toward recruitment and retention, we are looking this current year at a leadership academy in order to maintain and continue to foster staff development within this organization, as I stated a second ago, just to maintain that high level of operational excellence that we strive to as a staff and an organization. Brandon, you want to add anything there?
I think, do want to share with you that, we received a fellow this year. So Anu has been here working on language access plan, just crushing it. She's fantastic. She just did her first staff training today. It was an optional training for anyone that was interested in coming in and learning more about language access and the plan they're working on. Made use of our partners from Hindi. Bakas Mandel, thank you, sorry. So they were here as well to share some of their experiences. And we had, I think, 77 staff sign up for that. So, I mean, pretty close to a third of our staff. And keep in mind that, you had a lot of police officers and firefighters that weren't on duty. So, that was, I mean, this room was full. And it was really good to see, and they were attentive and a lot of good questions. So I think, that's going well. And so we actually were reached out to by UNC to ask if we would consider a fellow for FY26. And so we did, and we were granted another fellow. So that gives us the opportunity for another essential full-time employee that we pay a very nominal amount for to have them here. And then, the idea is that they will grow into potentially a position, here or somewhere else that they would be prepped for. So I will tell you now that you will see a request in the budget to continue a news position. Because that fellow grant ends at the end of June, but she's done such amazing work, and there's still more to do that the other comms staff doesn't have the capacity for. So we're taking full advantage of that, and now we have a fellow that's going to come in and support just what Byron was talking about in HR, and is going to help us with that leadership academy development and some training opportunities going forward, and that saves us asking you for a full-time position to do that in FY26. So that's helpful to us as well. Councilman Friender.
So the additional fellow would be doing something different?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 26 fellow is going to work with the HR department and focus on leadership academy training opportunities, that area of work.
Okay, and I guess I want to understand, why did, once the program has been established, why do we need to continue that position?
So with language access, so Anu is implementing right now the language access plan. And so she's got a work plan, and she's really just starting to get into it. So they've done some work with both interpretation and translation, but they're still developing additional tools. There's still work to be done with the community in terms of, particularly in our community, the Hindi community. I think I've shared with you before, but we participated in the Language Access Collaborative through UNC. And so when we went into that, what I was anticipating finding out was how do we better communicate with folks that may struggle? But my light bulb moment through that process was that I learned that we've got residents that don't even try to communicate with us because they assume they won't be able to. So that's another area that ANU is really focusing on. And so there's a lot of translation going on. We're doing a resource for interpretation for a lot of our staff. And, you might think initially of a police officer that's going to run into somebody where it might be beneficial. But, the fire marshal spoke up today. And, I run into this when I deal with small businesses. And so, we're doing translation not just in Hindi, but also in Chinese and Vietnamese, in part specific to our small business community. So there's still a ton of work to be done. And there's going to be ongoing work to maintain those efforts and continue to build that over time. I mean, my goal would be that ideally we would never have a resident that felt like they couldn't reach out to us because they might not be able to communicate. So that would be why we would ask to continue that position.
Yes, to play devil's advocate, why couldn't AI be used to do
I think
a
it
lot
can.
of that?
I think that's a potential part of that. And we are just getting into developing our AI. So we're looking at Copilot. I think we shared with you earlier this fiscal year that there was a delay because the government version of that had not come out. That has now come out. I believe IT's had it for about 30 days or so. And they're in the process of rolling out a test group. A number of us that are going to play with that and try it and see how it works to potentially become our own generative AI that would be used internally and potentially could also link to the chatbot that's going to be used on the website. So yeah, AI is certainly a part of that as well, but there's going to be a work for a person to do.
Okay. The Copilot AI isn't necessarily for the language translation.
No, the Copilot is more for just the use of AI for staff primarily. But it's gonna again tap into our own resources and make finding that information that is sometimes strikingly difficult to find now so much easier.
But why can't you use AI for the language portion?
I think we're looking at that. We're just not there yet.
Okay.
Aaron, did you have something?
Sorry, thank you. Just wanted to share really quickly a very recent story of the work that ANU has been doing and has helped us as an organization to do. So, as you know, we are very deep into garnering feedback from our community for our upcoming strategic plan update. And through my conversations with ANU and the full communications department, have translated our materials to Hindi, Chinese, Vietnamese, and Spanish. And so they do have a contracted company that they work with, but that company also asked us, or we have to contract with them to then verify that that translation has also been appropriately contexted. So it's a back and forth, it's a workload. We do, fortunately, have a couple of staff here with us that do speak Hindi. We are fortunate to have some staff that speak Spanish. We are very, very fortunate that as we continue to grow as an organization, the diverse range of our staff also continues to grow. But it is an intense workload for ANU, again, which I have just very recently learned more and more about. And she has been a huge help to me, and I am just but one person asking of her time for what we know is a great community need, and have already seen the payoff of that just in the outreach we did with Holy and the few times I've been to the senior center over the last few weeks, from our community members really appreciating us being able to offer those materials in the languages that are most familiar to them. So just wanted to give that little bit of context. Thank you. Sorry.
There.
We've discovered that this is a great model and very efficient use of our resources. Is it possible to reach out to NC State or Wake Tech to see if there's possible to have a fellow for sustainability? For example, I know we had an intern a few years ago. If we can be intentional about trying to support.
Yeah, we have opportunities for interns. I'm not aware of fellows, but we can certainly look into that. So Jeffrey's in the back of the room listening.
Okay, wonderful. And I love that you have a task force group that's going to be looking at Copilot. I would be very supportive of having an FTE that's foundational, who's an expert in AI that can help us throughout all the departments to try to help all departments get a really strong foundation in AI and how they might be able to help things.
And that certainly may come in the future.
Okay.
Good, Councilmember Fender? Okay. So this slide is really talking a little bit more about strategy and again, keeping in mind that long game. None of this is new to you. You know, when you look at the tax base, we do have a stronger tax base and around understanding what the growth has been and could be. We're really looking now to leverage potential economic development opportunities. The work that Tiffany is doing is, you know, again, just I said it at retreat, I'll say it again. When you have that dedicated resource to just do that work, it's amazing what work you can get done. And so her coming in with her knowledge of the county and the state and her existing contacts, she is, I'm quite confident, going to pay for herself going forward in future years through economic development opportunities. Again, we do still have some additional capacity from prior year revaluation. We did talk about some of last year would be one time, some of that would be recurring. So we'll be able to highlight for you what that one-time money was that will be reinvested. And then, of course, we've already talked about the revaluation changes. When you look at revenue, aggressive forecasting where possible. And so that's intelligent, aggressive forecasting. You know, so when you look at the property tax, I mean, we collect in Wake County at 99-point-something%. So we can assume that's all there. We don't need to be conservative in that regard, but then go down that list and be smart with sales tax revenue projections. So again, continuing to be a little conservative, not knowing what the market is going to be, certainly over at least the course of FY26. We've talked about being attentive to changing economic conditions and then really optimizing that user fee authority intelligently, not a free-for-all and get what you can get, but look at what the market is, look at what it means towards cost recovery, particularly in the Parks and Rec department, and being intelligent about that. Use of reserves, you know, we have consistently made some use of fund balance, but that's always been very controlled. It always goes towards one-time items. And again, I don't remember the last time we actually utilized fund balance in the budget. You know, it's really more of a balancing against the managed vacancy we expect because we won't be staffed 100% ever. I mean, there's too much opportunity there with turnover, retirements, et cetera. But we will continue to use that and use that intelligently. We are in the process of closing out any remaining ARPA initiatives, so we'll have that done. Again, flexible use of capital reserves to get projects shovel ready. We've talked about that. We're doing that in several cases now. And then, you know, we've previously talked about the fire apparatus reserve. We're transitioning that to really a public safety reserve because we've looked at other things like radios. We've looked at things like air packs. We've looked at things that are those bigger one-time tickets that need to be accounted for there to make sure that we're more of a pay-as-you-go for some of those larger purchases in public safety. And then lastly, other resources. Again, mentioned this earlier, we're closing out any remaining funds from completed projects. We always repurpose that. I think that also goes for any of the interest we're earning when we have that money sometimes sitting there. We're trying to make sure that that doesn't sit there any longer it needs to. We're utilizing that without damaging or impacting the reserves or any of our funds. Focusing on making intelligent use of restricted resources, both parks payment in lieu and streets payment in lieu. So always talking about how can we best utilize that. Manage use of lapsed salary for one-time initiatives. My philosophy on that, is that we are trying to move away from any intentional planned use of lapsed salary because we have been effective in reducing that lapsed salary number probably by close to 50% over the last 3 or 4 years. You know, some of that's very intentional planning on how we use it. Some of that's better success with maintaining staffing. So there is some flexibility that provides us, but avoiding assuming that we'll pay for things out of lapsed salary. And then finally, controlled base budget increases. And again, we've done that to some extent this year, and then we're really going to dive in again in the fall and make sure that we're starting from a level set ground zero to ensure that everything that's there is necessary and accounted for.
Councilmember Fender.
Yeah. Has there been talk among your counterparts about additional inflation concerns with the on-again, off-again tariffs? Or is it really just too soon to tell?
Very minimal conversations. I mean, I think everyone's aware that the concern is there, but until we really start to understand what that is, it's hard to predict that. One of the areas we've been talking about that is town center.
Yeah.
Because we know we have, a ROM that you've given us the opportunity to work with and invest. And so we're not adding things that are going to make that bigger, but when it goes to bid, if a tariff hits us, that's something we're going to have a conversation about because that's not really in our control. So we are looking at that, trying to understand what that impact may be. Fortunately, we have not seen that yet. There's always the chance we won't see that. When phase one goes out to bid, we're hoping it won't, but we are trying to maintain awareness of that. I've mentioned to some of you, Byron and the team are also looking at, we'll be prepared to share with you, where do we have federal money? And do we have any concerns with that? Where do we have state money? And if DOJ comes into the state and starts looking at some things there, do we anticipate any concerns with that? Today, I would tell you we don't have any significant concerns, but that's today, and things are changing fairly rapidly. But we are tracking that. We are staying on top of how could that potentially impact us, and we will certainly take that into consideration as we bring you a recommended budget for 26. All right? Councilmember Rao.
Just, well, I guess, my question was similar to what Councilmember Fender said, is just that, excuse me, looking at, inflationary, times, inflation's coming down, but still not coming down as much as people want. There's been some talk from economists about a potential recession. How does that factor into, this year or next year, just in terms of revenue forecasts? When you add that with the revaluation of 2 years, just kind of,
It's tricky, right? And I'll let Byron jump in if for what I missed, but I think, we are looking at in the sense that, we'll continue to look at revenues conservatively. The revenues that we need to, right? Because we know what we can count on and we know what's more flexible. So Byron is always looking at that. I'm always going to push him to find me another dollar to do more good in the community with that investment. But he's also pushing back and saying, this may not be the year to be any more aggressive than we have in the past. It might be the year to be a little more conservative. So we've had some early conversations about what does that look like. Even we've started to talk about, what do we potentially stop doing if there's a turn that we didn't anticipate. So we want to be ready for that. We can't really predict that, but we can have the idea of, okay, if we end up short $100,000, where do we find that? $100,000 and 58 million is pretty manageable. But when it starts talking about millions of dollars, that's a different story. And so we want to be ready for that so that if heaven forbid that happens, we aren't scrambling and coming back to you until we're not sure, we don't know what to do. We're going to have a plan for that, and we'll be able to have an intelligent plan that we can share with you if and when that time comes.
Yeah, I also would just add, as I mentioned earlier, we do continuous projections. We're constantly looking at where we sit from a capacity standpoint, where we sit from all of our revenues. And we do that on a monthly basis in order to make sure that we're picking up, new information, picking up, new trends, new data, everything that we can in order to be able to make the most educated decision-making that we can possibly do.
In development, economic development.
Right. And that is...
Approved, that, like rezonings we approved, things coming in, mixed use, that factors in over the next 6 months to a year.
Right, exactly. And that is something I want to point out as well, that, our projections aren't just quantitative. We aren't just looking at prior year numbers sometimes. As you stated, sometimes development and changes in development, seeing, zonings be approved, knowing that new development and, new construction is taking place, helps us in shaping what it is that we're going to look at in terms of sales tax, in terms of property tax, in terms of development fees, as well as in terms of, demographics changing and who is moving to the area and whether or not that affects any of our recreation fees, let's say. Knowing that participation and that change from changes in demographic and changes in population affect all of those different categories. So that's something that we're consistently looking at.
And one follow-up, I'm sorry. On the previous slide, you had about third-party contracts and about 175,000 increase. I know it's probably not going to make that much of a difference in terms of dollar value, but we've talked within Parks and Rec about reevaluating some of the programs that we outsource to third vendors and bringing it back in. Is that something we're factoring in a potential revenue that we could recognize from the MAFC?
Yeah, absolutely. And also I do want to point out as well, when you talk about revenue generation, is one of the questions in many of these budget meetings that we ask whenever a new initiative is proposed. One of the first questions we ask is, will there be revenue generated? Are there opportunities for revenue to be generated? Obviously, we don't want to nickel and dime all of our residents. But in a lot of cases, there are opportunities to develop revenue sources from some of the new initiatives that we do, whether that's from, enhanced services or changes in the operation itself that allow for that. So that's obviously something that we're considering when going through this budget evaluation process.
And I think to your question, Councilmember Rao, we literally had that conversation Tuesday with Parks and Rec about, they've got some asks. And so, okay, you've got this ask, but what's that? Can you help defer that on the other side? And we also had a conversation with them. They are really digging in to look at the programming. And so, a couple examples, particularly I think at CFCC, maybe a little bit at MAFC, but at CFCC, we've had a lot of programs where we allow somebody to come in and, we basically charge them either a small fee or the space, but then they get all the revenue.
That's
and
right.
because
Yeah,
they're a
I know.
consultant. So there is change afoot where though we are going to make them town employees, and then we're going to collect the revenue.
Yeah,
and
that's
we're going
right.
to pay them a fair hourly
That's the way,
rate.
'cause
But
right
we're
now
going to take the revenue because, we're providing the space, we're providing the opportunity, and we can certainly provide an instructor.
Yeah, because
So-
whatever revenue, like for example, tennis or pickleball, right now, the way I used to be a contractor, you would take 75% and the town would take 20% plus whatever rental fee you're paying. But in this case, the idea would be, let's us take 75%.
Yes.
So it would add up. If you had 50 people in a tennis program or pickleball class and we're taking 75%, that's reoccurring revenue coming in that we wouldn't have. So
Yep.
it may not be $100,000, but you never know. It could, yeah,
And it's transparent to the student.
Correct.
right, yes.
Correct. Okay. So we're going to sort of wrap up. I'm going to offer you, I guess, some insights. None of these should be shocking to you. We're going to talk a couple slides about challenges, and then we're going to talk a couple slides about opportunities. And then we're going to just give you that last opportunity for any questions or thoughts before we conclude. So in terms of challenges, Byron shared with you the $14.5 million number. When you pull out the recurring funding, the reinvestment into the reserves and things like that, it really brings us down to about $8.5 million in true new requests and about $5 million in funding that we can invest into those opportunities. So obviously there's a bit of a shortfall there. So we'll have some hard decisions to make. Some of that we'll bring to you to help us make some of those decisions as we prioritize opportunities and look at creative or innovative ways to try to fund some of those. We've already talked about increasing costs. There's been a bit of a leveling of late, so we're optimistic with Town Center as one example of what that could look like. And again, keep in mind, we also, I think, are making intelligent use of estimators, and in this case, Bobbitt, the construction company that's working with Singh, gave us a ROM just earlier this year. So this is not an old estimate. This is an estimate that's based on real world, so we're optimistic that will be close to the reality of the time. Again, limited new revenue. What this community saw up until probably 2019, 2020 was very different from today. So COVID impacted that, but a slowing of the natural growth has impacted that a little bit. So we're going to continue to evaluate that and see what that looks like year to year. Again, I think that the change in the reval has some impact there. But it's going to be a little different than I think we've perhaps experienced in the past. We've talked about the potential economic volatility. Again, just to your point, Councilmember Fair, tariffs and other things that could impact our projections. Next slide would be expanding cost. I'm sorry. Sure, of course.
I'm not following the 8.5 and the 5 million. I thought we had 6.5 million in capacity, so explain that. I'm just not following those two figures.
So I'll try, and Byron will correct me. So when he's showing you those larger numbers, that includes that we have money to put into, for example, the reserves that you fund at a penny, or that you fund the public safety reserve at 850. So they're in that bigger number. These numbers assume that you're likely going to want to do that again. And so this is just showing you what is really the new request, because we don't, as was mentioned, those investments in the future are not base budget. You commit to those every year because it gives you a little bit of flexibility with that if you needed to, you could adjust that.
Okay, I'm still not, I'm sorry, so let me back up. So we're talking about 6.5 million that we have in capacity, and of that, we have to fund our reserve accounts.
Right. That's correct.
And so you're telling me the 5 million is what's left after we fund all the reserves?
So this also includes the ability to appropriate some level of fund balance. Last year, we did about $1.5 million. So it would also appropriate a similar level for that as well. Okay.
You need to include all those numbers.
Okay.
'Cause, yeah, I'm not following these
Okay.
numbers.
We'll definitely bring that back, and at the next presentation, for sure, that information will be broken out and enumerated in a way that will be a lot more understandable.
Including fund balance out.
Mhm.
Okay, and then 8.5, what are you putting in there in 8.5?
So in a similar vein, there are some things in that $14.5 million that right,
Yeah.
exactly, yeah.
This is just to frame it. I think this is not intended to be, this is where we're at. This is just a general to give you a concept of, we have more requests than we have the opportunity to invest. Correct. 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 So that's what that is referring to. And as we start actually talking about, how we're going to budget, we certainly will have a clear, specific picture of those numbers.
Yeah.
Yep.
We'll definitely bring back some additional information in the next presentation for you.
So challenges, expanding costs of existing staff, we've already talked about that. Balancing capital and operational needs. As we continue to see sort of perhaps limited new revenues, it's a balance between doing that and funding your reserves. And the reserves are a great tool to use, but then you've also got to look at, what is going on today and where are your priorities there. So we'll continue to talk with you about that, work with you on that. And then prioritizing existing obligations versus new community-based programming. We may come to a time when there may be a decision that has to be made about, if you want to do something new, what are we going to stop doing or do less of? We're not there today, but again, I think as we continue to look forward, that may be a part of a future discussion. So want to put that on the horizon. But then we've got a lot of opportunities. So again, we consistently do conservative projections, so that protects us a little bit as we talk about the volatility and talk about being unsure. We've been very successful, I would say, recently in grants. So we're closing out ARPA funding and really looking for a lot of future grant opportunities. So Dawn's been very proactive in that. Josh Allman with the police department is like the grant guru for them. He has brought in a lot of money for the police department. Again, opportunity with future bond issuances. So, we continue to retire debt, but then we're also going to look at public works and the cost reduction there. So ideally, that gives you some potential debt capacity that we'll be talking about. How does it impact like a fire station? How does that impact future projects? And then the use of reserves. And we talked about that a little bit. I hear some of the concern with that. So we're gonna work our way through that for you. We've already talked about reval. It's an opportunity. There are some pros and cons with that, but we will have a lot more conversation about how do we deal with that? How do we anticipate that coming to an every other year approach in the future? We continue to work on creative solutions to advance the work. A lot of innovative and creative work going on by our staff. I mean, things as big as finding this other building on International Drive to smaller things that they're doing every day. The cost estimating that's going on through engineering has been so much better with using an actual firm that's not involved with things. And just a lot of work being done efficiently and effectively, and that will continue. That's who we are. Again, opportunity to make sure that we're continuing to learn and understand and support the community perspective and the council perspective. And they're typically going to be one and the same, but again, we specifically seek out both to make sure that we're meeting the expectations of the community as much as we can. And then, Councilmember Fender, to your point, generative AI, certainly an opportunity to continue to evaluate and test that and see ultimately where that takes us and how we can best use that. So we are on the same page with you. Byron, I'll turn it back to you.
All right, sounds good. Mayor, you have a comment before we ask any of the discussion problems?
Yeah, I just had one clarifying question about the previous slide about the revaluation. So just to be really clear, happening in 2027, but it will affect FY28.
That is correct.
So let's start thinking that way. We're doing FY26 now, so we have this one and the next one, and then we face reval questions then.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Wait, say that again?
Right now, we're doing FY26.
Yes.
The reval is happening in calendar year 27, but which affects FY28 budget. So
Okay,
it doesn't affect this budget or the next one. It's the-
And then every 2 years
After that.
thereafter. And we've talked a little bit that, that unfortunately is going to fall every time on a Morrisville election year. And that's just,
So-
it's another,
We'll never go above revenue neutral.
there's certainly an opportunity for that to happen. Okay. Councilmember Scroggins Johnson?
Thank you. So I've been taking notes, and thank you for this second half of the presentation. I know there's a lot of thought going through and a lot of difficult messaging because we're just in the beginning of this journey. Overall, I know this is going to be a tough budget season because there's a lot of uncertainties at the national, state, and of course, local level. And I really think that we need to be cautious about what we expand. So that is not just programming, but it is also staffing. And I hear you about the value of, an example is the language role, and I completely support communication and connecting with the public. But does that have to be a new position, or can that be a position that's open that we can repurpose from another department? So some of this need, we might have to be more flat versus always adding new. And when I worked in the private corporate sector, sometimes we would have opportunities to learn new roles and keep our current job, but we would do what they call a secondment. And so if there was a need to go into another department, you would take that role for a year or 2 years, whatever that was, but you would keep the same head count. It would just be somebody is helping out in a different capacity with possible career development opportunity, more training opportunity, and that way it was not adding net new, but it was also meeting the needs of that department, and that kind of helped rebalance things. And I think we might need to do some more of those kind of creative staffing. I don't know specifics because, again, this is a very dynamic environment that we're working in, but every position needs to be looked at. Our examples are, I know we have a lot of important management oversight, but do we, is a flatter organization going to be effective? There's just different ways of doing things. We need new roles, but do we need net new? So also some of the projects that we're looking at, I know you discussed that we have more projects than we have funding for. So which of those new projects are going to require a new person or a new role in order to support that? So we'll have to have thoughtful discussions about, with that new opportunity, there's going to be half-time position needed. And then again, if that half position's needed, can we transfer somebody for that, or do we need net new? So I think personnel is so important to the quality of life for the town as well as for the whole team in Morrisville. But if we become in a position where we have to make some hard choices, I'd rather keep the current staff. I'd rather not bring somebody in and then say, sorry, like a probationary employee. Not that that's ever happened nationally, but it has happened way too much. But I don't want to do that at the local level if we can avoid it. So let's be creative and thoughtful and really support our staff, because they are the best resources of the town. And we've been doing some amazing things. So I've been thinking a lot about how do we make it work, because we have a lot of good things coming out in the pipeline. So the next area, I was looking at your slides, and it talked about transportation. And we have some one-time and some recurring costs. And is the recurring costs on the transportation our shuttle, or is it staffing for the transportation area?
So it's both. So our shuttle is certainly a recurring cost right now. We're going to see somewhat of an increase in that, which is, expected to some extent. Of course, we have the alternative transit study going on that may impact that. Certainly not in FY26, I don't expect, but in future years it could impact that. One of the good things is Michelle has just filled her transportation, help me with the new title, transportation project manager. So you're used to seeing Danielle for a while. So Brett is going to start Monday also in that role. So we'll be back to a 2-person transportation department or transportation unit within the planning department with Caleb. So yeah, that there is some cost of, the 2 people become, more expensive each year. There are other things going on in transportation that are one time. Some of that deals more with, you could relate some of the projects we're working on. One of the things you've seen on there is the betterments are certainly one-time projects. And, we sometimes have to shuffle those because we're relying on DOT. And the other problem we have is that, we also, the costs are just in some cases crazy. So for example, we had planned to do betterments along the median on Morrisville Carpenter Road. And so engineering is responsible for that project. So they bid it, I think, 2 times and got nobody. And then the 3rd time they got 1 person, and that bid was twice what we budgeted to do work in the median. So we're holding off on it because I can't begin to justify that we would spend twice.
I can tell you that neighborhoods along Morrisville Carpenter would love those betterments, but we have to do some balance, right? But messaging would be appreciated around that as well.
Yeah, so we can certainly communicate that. Other things that we're looking at, Aviation Parkway, we have ongoing discussions with NCDOT as to whether they'll consider moving that up. If they are willing to do that, is there going to be an ask of us to help, expedite that project financially? And then if it doesn't get expedited, we've had the conversation of the need for sidewalks there. And, and that's not currently, we have some money set aside towards that now, but, that's one of those one times that, we don't normally anticipate, but that's going to be an expensive stretch of sidewalk if it gets done. But given the activity with both HSNC and Cedar Fork District Park, I'm very concerned about public safety along there.
So the betterments that I was talking about are trees in the median.
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I get that. Yes,
Okay,
that's
okay.
Morrisville Carpenter Road.
Right.
But when we talk about transportation costs.
And I know about the sidewalks on Aviation are so critical for safety as well.
Yep. So I think all those are different examples of how we're spending money for transportation issues.
Okay. Thank you for that
Sure.
clarification. And then my last item, because I know that there's a lot of great ideas around the table. I can see the light bulbs coming on. Is the senior center money for events? I know that we looked into cost recovery just before the retreat, and Parks and Rec did present about models that they were proposing. And I think there was some support during the retreat and maybe before the retreat about setting aside some money to help subsidize event costs, because those are rising, and we were doing cost recovery on like the holiday events and maybe some other food events so that it would be a nominal fee for seniors and they would not have a barrier to attending the social events, which are so critical for engagement with our senior population. So, and if anybody wants to comment, on that as well, with the go around, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sure. And Parks is looking at that. They are looking at some different options, I think, particularly as it relates to our non-residents, because our residents are supporting that through their tax dollars. Our non-residents are not. And in many cases, it's more non-residents than it is residents. So Parks, we talked about that this week, and I expect you'll hear something on that potentially on the 10th as to a way that they may look at trying to provide a little bit of revenue to help some of that offset, particularly for our residents that are participating at Senior Center.
Great. Thank you.
Yep. I think Mayor Colley and then Mayor Pro Tem Garamella.
So thank you very much. Good presentation, and to sort of piggyback on Councilmember Scroggins Johnson, the uncertainty and how we're generally conservative, I think it would help me to really know what is actually at risk of our revenue streams. So we just established that FY28 is when the reval happens. So property tax revenue is pretty solid, at least through then. I don't see that changing much, and that's the largest bucket.
Correct.
Sales tax revenue would be more at risk.
Correct.
So if staff was able to bring back like what we're expecting, best case scenario, worst case scenario, and then some of the council might be more comfortable thinking about the worst case and making sure that we're not going too far above that, and any of the other ones which are much smaller and nominal, so that we have a real feel for what our revenues will probably be. I know we're already conservative, but if we really address it head on and understand that property tax, that's fine for a few years. Sales tax, maybe a little iffy, so we should be careful in that space, but we shouldn't be so overly conservative thinking, oh no, it might be really bad, but then when you look at the numbers, it's actually pretty solid no matter what. So I think that would be helpful for me to sort of get a feel so that we can all feel comfortable with what we're saying yes to and not having to maybe use our fund balance for the first time in a long time.
So if I could comment on that
yeah,
real
please
quickly. So yes, and
Yep.
to my fellow people. Yes, we certainly can look at that. I'm hesitant to give you what we think might be a worst case, because I don't know we can predict that. I think that we can certainly give you what we anticipate, assuming that things would stay as they are, and we can have some discussion about where you might want to go with that. But I'm hesitant to give you a worst case scenario because we could miss that, right? I mean, if you look at what happened in like 2008, who was going to predict that was the worst case scenario? Even more recently with some of the downturn, I don't know that we can necessarily predict that, but I think it can be an intelligent conversation with you about, how conservative do you want to be in some of those areas that we don't necessarily know what's going to happen.
Yeah. So we heard an opinion that is fairly conservative, maybe not had any staff. So we're going to find the balance as a group. So the more information we have and the more comfort we are as what's probably going to happen would be good.
Yes, sir.
Another thing that I heard is when we're doing I'm implying the Eisenhower exercise, instead of just line items, if there are general dollar amounts associated with each of those and maybe any new FTEs that might influence people's decision-making about where they put things, like something that costs the same but costs an FTE, which they see as recurring, they might not want to do that one as much as the other. So that would be another thought that might.
So my understanding was the Eisenhower we were going to do around capital projects. Are you suggesting you want an Eisenhower on operational line items?
Nope, but I thought that there might be some FTEs like the town center CIP project would have 2 new FTEs, for example. There's like the Pew House as a capital project that, it's not funded, so it's not going to be in there. Will that one be in the exercise?
Yeah, I mean, I think
So
we
Crabtree
can,
will be in there,
we
6
can
million for
potentially
Crabtree.
include the unfunded. I don't think you're going to see town center on that because that's a funded project that's moving forward. We're way past respectfully, we're way past reprioritizing that.
Right.
I think that the things that are still on the CIP to begin would be the items that we would bring you, and that would include things that are funded and also potentially unfunded items, because I think there's been some suggestion to revisit some of those as well.
So having dollar values and any FTE associated with those items might help give more information to people as we go into that.
Okay.
So I just wanted to share that.
All right, Mayor Protem?
Yeah, I think for me, it's too immature to even ask that kind of conservative numbers, because it's not just the taxes, in my opinion, it's also the things around it. We don't know if tomorrow some money has been taken away from the school system that is mandatory for the safety or something that they may ask, an additional ask. I don't know. Like, there's so many things that go back of my mind. So I think till we get all those things, it's hard. But coming back to the senior thing, I think having a small pocket of 15,000 or something, it's a low key where the money will only be used to the residents, not to the not the non-residents, because that's who we are, we cater to, and non-residents is good, but it's we don't subsidize for those.
And that's to defer costs, not necessarily make it all free.
When you say defer cost, what?
So not necessarily, not aim for 100% cost recovery, but still charge something? Or do you want sufficient funds that, every meal, every trip, and other things that they do is free to them?
So I don't know what it takes, the whole cost, if you can give those things, that would be good, because I don't know what it is right now. If a senior wanted everything free, what is it versus what right now they're paying, and what is the total amount that we are looking at? Because I have no answer. Is it like 10,000? Is it 15,000 and 20,000?
Okay. Yeah, I think we can share that with you, and it may be helpful for you to see what
at
other
the time,
senior centers are doing as well, because quite honestly, we're a bit of an exception to offer as many free things as we do.
That would be
particularly
good.
Related to some of the classes and other things.
Yeah, absolutely. That would also be a good, because we don't know right now. Information is always good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anybody before we go back around? Councilmember Brown, sorry, I never heard the thing behind my.
Yeah, I think I'm going to just digest a lot of the information today. I think, just deferring to your all's discretion of, how can we continue to provide good service, making sure that we're treading with caution, with potential uncertainty at both the federal and the state level. One thing that I'm curious about, and Byron, this goes into the thing we talked about, forecasting, is one thing that I'm concerned about is the increasing amount of office vacancy we have, particularly in Perimeter Park. And I'm very curious as to how that affects, post-COVID, people aren't coming back to work. There's been a lot of companies that haven't renewed there. Microsoft pulled out one building, Cineos Health is gone. How does that affect us, in the present day with lost revenue, lost opportunity, lost people coming in? I think it also poses an opportunity for very out-of-the-box thinking for redevelopment for Morrisville, which I think could potentially be, something like, a box yard, a Fenton. I don't know. I just see that area of Morrisville right now, when you go there, is absolutely dead. There used to be a day when you went through Perimeter Park, you couldn't find a parking spot. Now you drive through there, it's completely empty, right? So that's just something to throw out there in terms of how does that affect our budget this year, 2 years out, right? Our economic development plans.
So, and I'll respond really quickly. So one of the things that Wake County Tax Office does that is really, really beneficial and really effective when it comes to coming up with an assessed value and working through our property tax base is they do factor in vacancy rates when it comes to commercial properties. So they do a good job of trying to gather as much information, as much data as they can about where current vacancy rates are. Now, it's not a perfect science because they do it across the board in the entire county, but they do try and factor in our particular area and what they know about our particular vacancy rates in commercial properties. So, like you said, it does create an opportunity because as those vacant properties get filled, that does increase our tax base. But what we do know is that our valuation factors in those vacancies. So there's never going to be a point, or at the very least, it minimizes the opportunity for a property to be valued one way and potentially have a lot lower tax amount of tax paid brought in, so that we don't end up with a scenario where we think our assessed value is here and therefore our tax base is here, and in reality it's down here, and we need to somehow make up that difference or not have that difference when it comes to bringing in revenue.
Yeah, but I mean, it's less people coming in the town, less people spending stuff, less people, because there's
Right.
hundreds and thousands of people coming into Morrisville. And that's my concern, is that there are less people coming in. And until we have a town center, where are those people going to go? Well, they're going to stay at home, they're going to go somewhere else. Maybe they'll go on one side of Morrisville, so.
So, just a couple of things. The more information, the better for me. I like details. So, and I get it. This is a stepping process. I get that. But the more detail, the better. I just want to clarify this Eisenhower exercise that we're going to do. It's not to evaluate all of the CIP. It's just the one project we want to potentially bring forward or not, and versus the others. I want to make sure, because I think I heard something different a minute ago. It's not to reevaluate everything. It's just to take all the unfunded and decide which one we want to bring forward, and if that is, am I saying that correctly? Because that's how I interpreted what we were talking
So
about.
glad you asked that, because that's not the way I interpreted
That's-
what was asked. I took it as we're going to take funded and unfunded that are not already under progress and reevaluate.
Oh, that's not how I interpreted either. So, okay.
That's
Then
ridiculous.
let's clarify that. So, because
That's for doing the whole CIP exercise. I think we want to focus in on, just this year, don't we?
I mean, that's the question.
Yeah.
I don't, okay.
Well, if we're just focusing on this year, we won't be looking at the Crabtree
What's-
Nature Park or
What's, right,
View House.
what we're doing in
But
year
that's
five.
part of unfunded to me. What I mean by this year is we put in, through this presentation is within 5 years, we're going to be funding a recreation center. So that's the same scope. And the scope includes Crabtree Nature Park, because that's unfunded, and that was on the slide, and that's what I wanted to prioritize, is everything that was on that slide saying unfunded, including the proposed recreation center. I don't want to go through all 50 items. Does that make sense? Keep it within the things listed in the slide deck,
So if you look at
Yeah.
what's up here now,
right?
is that what you would like to plus the unfunded? Because this is the funded.
Right.
So you want to look at these plus the unfunded.
Well, I
'Cause-
think we need to talk about the recreation center. And I don't know what list that is on, but
It's right there.
It's on 2030 as a funded design project.
Where's that? Oh, but it's,
Recreation and multipurpose center.
but that
design.
needs to go
But
in
it's
the
not.
list.
but it's not funded.
There is some funding shown towards design in FY30, Jeannie. Yes.
How did that?
Is it $6 million though? So let
It's
me,
for
let
the
me,
design.
let me add just a little bit here for contextual purposes. When you did the exercise at retreat, the Dotmocracy, you actually set prioritization in motion. And what staff did when they came back and showed you the results, we actually showed the projects, as you said, do sooner in the 5-year picture, those do later in the 5-year picture. And as a result, for example, the recreation center actually was prioritized by council to come into that 5-year picture. So what we're demonstrating to you today, which is why we asked the question, what do you need to change? What do you need to talk about more? Is using your input and using the input from staff about their project updates, timing, cost, when things are due to NCDOT, for example, This is how they landed with that input from your prioritization exercise that you've already done.
Thank you.
Okay.
And where they landed, we really haven't seen yet. This is the first time
Right.
that we've had a chance. And
Right.
so I think there is a majority of us wanting to have an opportunity to readjust or at least reconfirm.
When did we confirm that that was a majority?
Well, one, I was counting. I didn't count you as a yes, but it seemed like we had at least 4 people.
Yeah, so
I know, I'm not done yet, but.
oh, go ahead.
No, let's finish this topic. No, go ahead, but come back to me. I got a list. Go ahead.
Oh, no.
No, finish this topic, because,
So I just, want to- like, we keep saying the recreation and multipurpose center, but that's not what's on the list. The recreation and multipurpose center design
is on
is
the
on
list.
the list.
Correct.
Right.
So it's not like you can sub in Crabtree Creek Nature Park for the design of the recreation and multipurpose center. It's nowhere near the same amount of, isn't part of what you're doing here, looking at what will fit within that $12 million. And like, I'm just saying that it's not, we're not talking about in 2030, like breaking ground on the multi-purpose center. We need to be clear that that's the design.
Correct.
So we're talking about if we're gonna sub in either project, either other project, Pew House or the Crabtree Creek Nature Park, we're talking about a much larger number in that 12 million.
Yes, that's possible, and I think, I don't want to speak for you, Councilmember Farren, but I think where Councilmember Fender was coming from is that regardless of if it's design or anything else, that she may feel that there's other projects that should come before
Even the
the
design.
community center. So even starting the design, is that accurate, Councilmember Farren? I don't want to put words
Yeah,
in your
that's
mouth.
correct.
So it would be helpful to me to know exactly what dollar value is attached to that project before
That's
we
fair.
start talking about what we can sub in.
Well, but I think that's getting into the weeds. I think the proposal was to go back and do the Eisenhower exercise just to verify as another tool to take a step back and re-verify what the consensus is of the council as far as priorities.
So with that, I would suggest we just need to know where's the line in the sand, right? What do you not, as a group, perhaps want to really reconsider? Is there a year that you want to start with? Is there certain projects you want to start with to look at that Eisenhower for prioritizing primarily unfunded projects? Because what you see is generally funded. Again, the asterisk with the community center is that that's only towards design, which is going to be this much of what could be a very expensive project.
But I'm saying that if the only problem is the community center, then what, or the community center design, then why do we need an Eisenhower thing? That's literally the only project that anybody, I mean, does anybody else have a different project that they are not happy with being prioritized on this slide? It's only that one project, right?
Pew House.
Right.
And
But
you know
on
it's
this
small.
slide.
But on this slide, I'm saying this is a list of what's currently in the CIP. But is there anything that you don't want on there besides the recreation purpose design?
I don't want the Wake Tech Park thing.
Wait, I like the hammocks.
I mean, what's
No,
the
no,
big,
I mean,
what's the big
it's a
deal of
brilliant thing.
doing the Eisenhower exercise? It takes like 15 to 30 minutes to do. So what's the big deal? We're spending more time talking about it than it takes to actually do it.
Mayor, on this topic?
I would kind of agree with that insofar as it's another data point. We're
I
not
don't-
obligated to, if a certain priority comes up in front of another
Yeah.
one, it means that we want to talk about it more. It
I
doesn't mean
don't
that it's
want to
moving
do what
on there.
you suggested though about adding the how many FTs and cost and blah, 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 all that mess, but I just want to do a plain Jane Eisenhower, be done with it.
Compromise would be to have the dollar values there, so some people who that might influence their decision, they'd have that data. But
Oh my
I'm up for whatever
But that's
council
not
wants
how
to
we've
do.
done it in the past.
That is not
Okay,
how we've
can I
done it in
make
the
a
past.
suggestion?
Yes,
Go ahead
ma'am.
and do the whole full-blown Eisenhower. Let's
Yes.
see what it comes up with, but don't lose this slide, so we can compare it to this slide.
Yes.
And then we'll move forward from there.
Okay.
Can I also,
Yes,
ca-
she's
I, yes, I push the button too many times. You can't do part of them. I don't think you'll get the results of learning where and informing where each of you sits in the consensus of what's important to you. I want to add to that you have done a prioritization exercise, and I think it's important to, somebody said, a validation. It's like a second check, a test of what you've already done. Does it still proof out? And doing it offline, I think you can quickly do that as long as we can turn it around soon so that we can work with our analysts to really reshuffle the deck if there's something that comes out of that. But I think it's very important that you take what you did from retreat and compare it to this Eisenhower and then see where is the similarities and where are there are not similarities. Does that make sense? And I think we can easily accomplish that.
Thank you.
Okay.
So we'll get something out, and you can work through that, and then if we need to circle back after that, we can continue to work through that. Okay?
Okay.
Councilmember
Yeah,
Johnson,
I've
back
got
to
some
your
more. So I like what Vicki said about trying to be creative when we're talking about staffing. And so I would echo that, and I would add to that even if we're going to be flexible and creative, the idea of full or part-time temp positions too. And so I would just throw that out there. As far as the senior center, and I think we need more information. And so hopefully when Parks and Recs comes back with their cost recovery study, I'm hoping that we'll see some specific figures too, to understand how much revenue is coming into the senior center, how much folks, what that is, because I have no clue. I'm with you. I don't know if we're going to start subsidizing even more. I need to know what's going on today. And who? 100% who. And I will tell you, the who is more concerning to me than anything. And we've had this, you know that.
I
So
think
that data is going to be critically important before we make any decisions.
Yeah, we can certainly show you where we are this year, what's being charged for, what's free, and what you're spending to operate the senior center.
Yeah.
Because, what you're recovering is
Yes.
minute
Yep.
in the context of the cost of that facility by the time you talk about the lease and the staff and the instructors and some supplies and equipment. So we can definitely do that. They'll be close to predicting, I think, or laying out potential revenues. Related to the senior center, we might be able to have that ready. They're not going to have their full work ready based on what we saw this week. They're still fine tuning, but I think they will certainly have an update for you on how they're going to approach cost recovery, and we could certainly have some information to you around the cost specific to the senior center.
Okay. Go ahead, finish that
Yeah,
topic,
no,
and then I got
I
one
mean,
more.
I mean to say, I understand what you're trying to get, but I feel the cost of running that facility is not the question here. It is needed. It is what it is. We are not trying to cut the cost.
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, so it is just the programming of how much we are subsidizing or they're paying or how much is.
Yeah.
We are, the only thing is that small piece. We're not going into the whole because there are thousands of other things that we are doing and that we are consuming
I
the
would
cost.
agree.
I just want to be clear.
Okay, and then just the last thing, and this kind of ties into my being creative about staffing and moving forward. I am deeply concerned this budget year, more than I've been in the recent past. And, I was around in the 2008, 2000 timeframe. I know what heartache that budget was. I was also around back in the early 2000s when we had the dot-com bust, and the state took revenue from us mid-year, and we had to adjust our budget mid-year. Those were really difficult times, and they felt bad. I'm feeling real bad right now about the state of everything, the state of North Carolina, the state of this this country, the money that's flowing, the people that are being laid off, and how that's going to affect everything. So I really appreciate how conservative we always are when we do our budgets, and that has been really helpful. I'm feeling like we have to be even more conservative this year. I am so uneasy about everything right now, and that's going to affect how I feel and how I'm going to land in this budget and what we do and what we fund. And I think we need to be really careful. And I also think I would tell you the coming weeks, I think it's in the coming days, we need to pay attention to everything that's happening around us, because it's going to affect us, and it's going to affect our residents, it's going to affect our business community, and in the end, that's going to affect our revenue stream somehow in some ways. And so I feel like so doom and gloom by saying all this, but I think we go tread lightly in the next couple of weeks, and you know, I'm going to hope for the best. I am one that likes to focus on all the you know, the cons, and being ready to handle anything that comes my way, and being prepared, and I feel more comfortable doing that. And then when it doesn't happen, it's like a hallelujah. So anyhow, I just needed to share that, because that's how I'm going to go into this budget year.
Gotcha.
No, I just want to echo and piggyback, because I don't know who I was talking to. Like, I'm getting texts from people like, you know, EPA, they're doing a mass layoff on 14th. And as much as we take pride of RTP and the Triangle area and this, it's going to affect a lot of our people. Especially we are research in biopharma, tech, and also, like, you know, sustainability. You take EPA, like, you know, clean air technology, and do everything. And many times, you know, like, I'm walking my dog, all these PhD postdocs from Duke and others, you know, they're not sure, just walking, you know, with thing when their research grant will go away. So it's not just the seniors now. This is like impacting our mainstream people. Everyone, I don't know what's going to happen, you know. So that's the biggest fear that I have, and we got to be very, very cognizant.
Also, I mean, well, quickly I'll add that even the governor himself and others have talked about, you know, us potentially hitting a fiscal cliff in the state, and a lot more of the budget requests are coming in for Western Carolina. So where I'm going with that is that, you know, I think that could have a ripple effect downstream to the cities and the counties, less money coming in, less money, you know, in addition to the economic factors of the job loss. So I just think these are all things that we need to be prepared for. Things were going quite well after COVID, and now all of a sudden it's kind of going back to like an uncertainty, but there's nothing we can do but just keep our eyes on it.
Correct. All right. Any other comments, thoughts, questions before we wrap up?
On that happy note.
Well, thank you very much. I would say we got a lot of good, useful information out of this. I hope we answered your. So thank you again for the time. I think this was great conversation, what we needed to happen. It points us in a direction as we begin to prepare, you know, a recommended budget for you. So we will see you, obviously other meetings, but the 10th for our next work session, so that we can then talk about Parks and Rec cost recovery, some other fees, and then depending on how long we think that takes, we may have some follow-up with you on some of what we talked about tonight, to get a little more direction as we start to feel things out and try to figure out a direction of what we want to go. And then certainly by that third work session, we will be pretty close to here's some options we need you to help us with as to what goes in or what doesn't go in. All right.
Basically, just what he was saying. The only other thing I do want to point out is feel free to use the QR code to take a look at the budget page this year to gather any additional resources related to the budget process.
Anything else for the good of the order, sir?
No.
I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Councilmember Morale, second by Councilmember Body. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, that carries unanimously 7-0. It is 9:02. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much.